Hello, sleepy traveller. Tuck yourself in, dim the room, and prepare for a peaceful drift through uneventful history. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. You're standing on the cobbled streets of 15th century Lisbon, where the air is thick with the scent of adventure and, well, a fair bit of fish. Welcome to a time where Portugal isn't just a sunny vacation spot, it's the Silicon Valley of seafaring. The nation is buzzing with the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that makes modern tech startups look like lemonade stands. Now, life here isn't exactly a fairy tale. The country is like a scrappy underdog in a medieval boxing ring, trying to punch above its weight. Economically, Portugal's not rolling in dough like its neighbour Spain. But it's got something even better: ambition and a healthy obsession with spices. Yes, spices. Those tiny morsels of flavour that had the power to make or break fortunes. Imagine pepper and cinnamon as the Bitcoin of the 1400s. You, my friend, are born into a world where the allure of the spice trade is as intoxicating as a siren's call. You're surrounded by tales of far-off lands where nutmeg and cloves are worth their weight in gold. Quite literally. These aren't just kitchen staples. They're the stuff of legends and the currency of kings. The demand is so high that Europe might as well be suffering from a collective case of bland food syndrome. And here you are in a nation poised to spice things up. So why the ocean voyages? Why risk life and limb on the high seas when you could be safe on land, drinking wine and dodging the occasional tax collector? Well, think of these voyages as the medieval equivalent of launching a startup. It's all high risk, high reward. Sure, you might face storms, scurvy, or the odd pirate attack, but if you succeed, you're set for life. You could come back home with enough money to buy a castle, or at least a pretty snazzy horse. Outfitting a ship for such a voyage isn't cheap. We're talking about a small fleet, where each vessel could cost around 1,000 cruzados, an amount that makes today's venture capitalists clutch their wallets tighter. You'd need to stock up on provisions, hire a crew, and don't forget the weapons. The sea isn't exactly known for its hospitality, and you're as likely to encounter unfriendly locals as you are to find a paradise beach. Back home, Portugal is like a pressure cooker of social and economic change. You've got a society where the nobility and the emerging merchant class are playing a game of economic one-upmanship, and the stakes are high. The monarchy, headed by the likes of King John II, is keen on expanding the nation's influence, and a successful voyage could mean new territories and trade routes. But let's not romanticize things too much. The life of an explorer is tough. We're talking cramped quarters, monotonous diets of salted meat and hardtack, and a good chance you'll die of something unpleasant. Still, the promise of untold riches and eternal glory is enough to keep you, and many like you, dreaming of the horizon. In this world, you're not just an explorer, you're a gambler with the ocean as your poker table. Every voyage is a roll of the dice, but the rewards? They're enough to make you forget about the risks, at least until the next storm rolls in. Keep your eyes on the horizon, because what lies beyond could change your life forever, or at least make for one heck of a story. And so, you find yourself standing on the deck of a creaky Portuguese caravel, staring into the vast blue yonder. The promise of untold riches and eternal glory is enough to keep you dreaming of the horizon. It's a strange feeling, knowing that just beyond your vision lies the unknown, both terrifying and tantalizing. Let's not kid ourselves. This isn't your luxury cruise with a buffet and poolside cabana. This is the 15th century Atlantic, a place where Poseidon himself might look up from his underwater lair and say, "Yikes! Good luck with that." First things first, let's talk about the tech of the time. Your ship is equipped with the latest in 15th century navigation technology, which is a bit like saying you've got the newest Nokia flip phone in the age of smartphones. Your navigational toolkit includes rudimentary maps, astrolabes, and compasses. The astrolabe, a sort of medieval GPS, is used to measure the angles of celestial bodies. Sure, it sounds fancy, but in reality it's more like trying to find your way with a sundial. And then there are the maps. Beautiful, but about as accurate as a weather forecast. Most maps of the period were more like artistic impressions of the world rather than reliable guides. You might find a sea monster doodled in the corner for dramatic effect, but don't count on it to point you to the nearest Starbucks. The compass, however, is your steadfast companion. Invented by the Chinese and perfected by the Europeans, it's a nifty little device that becomes your best friend on these perilous journeys. A simple needle that points north seems basic today, but back then it was revolutionary. It's the tool that kept many a ship from wandering endlessly into oblivion, or worse, into the hands of pirates. And if you're thinking pirates are the Johnny Depp kind, think again. These are more like the take your stuff and maybe your life kind. No eyeliner or quirky charm to be found here, just a real threat on the high seas. Now, why is everyone so fixated on the ocean anyway? Well, let's dive into the political motives. You see, the late 15th century is a time when nations are playing a game of global monopoly, and everyone wants Boardwalk and Park Place. After all, he who controls the spice controls the universe, or at least the really tasty parts of it. The Catholic Church, not one to sit things out, gets involved with a series of papal bulls. Think of these as divine property deeds, granting Spain and Portugal rights to newly discovered lands. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, for instance, drew an imaginary line down the globe, giving Spain the Americas and Portugal everything to the east. It's like two kids divvying up Halloween candy, but with continents. But let's not forget the personal ambitions of the explorers themselves. These voyages aren't just about national pride or papal blessings. They're about individual glory and personal gain. Every sailor on board dreams of coming home a hero or, at the very least, not in a pine box. For the captains, success means titles, land, and wealth beyond imagination. For the crew, it means survival and maybe enough spoils to retire in comfort. However, most of them are just hoping to avoid scurvy, a condition as pleasant as it sounds. Scurvy is the sailor's nemesis, a vitamin C deficiency that makes you feel like you've been hit by a medieval plague. If only oranges could survive the journey. But alas, it's hardtack and salted meat for months on end. Life aboard is far from glamorous. The romantic notion of the sea is quickly dashed by the reality of cramped quarters, where privacy is a foreign concept. You're sharing space with rats and lice, and let's not sugarcoat it. The smell is enough to make even the hardiest sailor gag. Hygiene? Let's just say it's not a top priority when fresh water is scarce. Bathing is a luxury reserved for the rain, and your daily fashion choices are limited to the one outfit you've got that's now a permanent part of your skin. But despite all odds, the ocean calls, and the allure of the unknown is a siren song too powerful to resist. The sea is both a cruel mistress and a benevolent provider, offering riches beyond belief to those who dare to challenge her. Every wave is a reminder of the risks, but also of the rewards waiting just beyond the horizon. It's a gamble, sure, but one that could change your life forever, or at least make for one heck of a story to tell the grandkids. Oh, and don't forget to keep that compass handy. After all, you wouldn't want to take a wrong turn and end up in uncharted waters. As the wind fills your sails, you can't help but wonder what lies ahead. One thing's for sure, though, it's going to be one wild ride. As the wind propels you toward the edge of the known world, you're about to discover that the horizon isn't just a line where the sky meets the sea. It's a gateway to lands brimming with opportunity, misconception, and, let's face it, a fair bit of chaos. Welcome to the front lines of cultural exchange, or what some might call a historical game of telephone gone wrong. Picture this. Your ship, after months of relentless creaking and groaning, finally spots land. Your feet touch the sand, and you're greeted not by golden cities or fountains of spice, but by the curious gazes of the indigenous people. The myths you've heard of untold riches and exotic wonders aren't exactly matching up with reality. Instead, you're faced with a land and a people that don't fit neatly into your European preconceptions. And thus begins the delicate, often clumsy dance of first contact. Now, let's get one thing straight. These interactions aren't a meet and greet with gift bags at the door. They're fraught with misunderstandings, cultural missteps, and sometimes outright hostility. You and your crew, armed with trinkets like glass beads, mirrors, and bells, might think you're offering a treasure trove. But to the indigenous peoples, these are the equivalent of handing out promotional keychains at a trade show. Sure, they're shiny, but they're not exactly useful in everyday life. Yet, for all the awkward exchanges, there's a glimmer of genuine curiosity and even mutual benefit. You introduce them to European goods like metal tools and, more infamously, firearms, items that, for better or worse, would change their societies forever. In return, you receive local resources like food supplies, which, after months of scurvy-inducing rations, are as precious as gold. This is the beginning of a new economic era, a global exchange that would forever alter the course of history. But let's not sugarcoat it. This isn't just a friendly swap meet. The darker side of this trade is the exploitation and, more pointedly, theft. You're not just here to trade, you're also here to claim. Under the guise of discovery, you plant your flag and declare the land for the crown. It sounds noble in the history books, yet to the people who've lived there for generations, it's nothing short of theft. The indigenous peoples become subjects of a new world order they never asked for, a fact often glossed over in the romantic tales of exploration. Let's talk economics for a moment. The new lands promise resources that European markets are desperate for. We're talking about sugarcane, tobacco, and, yes, those spices that have everyone in a tizzy. The potential profits are astronomical. To put it in perspective, a ship returning from the east laden with spices could yield profits as high as 400% on the original investment. That's right, we're talking returns that would make a hedge fund manager drool. But here's the kicker. With great profit comes great exploitation. The indigenous people, once sovereign in their lands, find themselves caught in the gears of a burgeoning global economy. They're introduced to the concept of labour, European style, where work isn't just a way to sustain life, but a means to generate wealth for someone else. This is the nascent stage of a global system that would see entire populations subjugated for the sake of economic expansion. The cultural misunderstandings are equally complex. You, the explorer, come armed with preconceptions, expecting to find civilizations that mirror your own. When you don't, it's all too easy to label these people as savages or primitive, ignoring the rich tapestries of their cultures. It's a myopic view that paves the way for centuries of stereotyping and racism. Yet, despite the misunderstandings, there's an undeniable fascination, a mutual curiosity that sparks moments of genuine human connection. These interactions are a double-edged sword. On one side, they lay the groundwork for cultural exchange, introducing new foods, technologies, and ideas that enrich both worlds. On the other, they set the stage for conflict, conquest, and colonization. The indigenous peoples aren't just passive recipients of European intrusion. They resist, adapt, and negotiate, showing resilience and agency in the face of overwhelming odds. As you stand on these shores, it's clear that this isn't just the discovery of a new land, it's the beginning of a new era of global commerce. The ships that return to Europe aren't just carrying exotic goods. They're bringing back stories and knowledge that will ignite imaginations and spark further explorations. The world is becoming interconnected in ways previously unimaginable, setting the stage for both unparalleled progress and profound inequities. It's a lot to take in, this whirlwind of discovery, trade, and conflict. You're a part of something much larger than yourself, a player in a drama that will unfold over centuries. The horizon calls, always promising more, but as you look back at the land behind you, you're reminded that every new beginning is someone else's ending. The sea awaits, ready to carry you to your next adventure, but the lessons you've learned on these shores will stay with you, shaping your journey and the world around you. As you prepare to set sail once more, it's clear that the age of exploration is as much about introspection as it is about discovery. You're not just charting new waters, you're navigating the complexities of human interaction, driven by ambition, curiosity, and a desire for something beyond the horizon. And while the world is vast and full of potential, it's also a mirror reflecting the best and worst of humanity. So keep your compass steady and your wits about you. You're going to need them both in this brave new world. As you hoist the sails and bid farewell to the exotic shores, let's talk about what it's like when those sails finally bring you back to the cobbled streets of Lisbon. Spoiler alert, it's not all parades and confetti. The tales of your exploits, those Herculean feats of navigation and diplomacy, have preceded you, but so have whispers of the less glamorous realities. You've danced with the siren call of the unknown, and now face the equally unpredictable shores of Portuguese society, where the reception is as mixed as the spices you've brought home. First off, Let's address the elephant in the room, or the elephant in the hold, if you will. The cargo you bring back is more than just exotic spices and rare goods, it's the weight of expectation. Your hold is packed with cloves, nutmeg and cinnamon, each worth its weight in gold and then some. A single sack of pepper can fetch up to 80 ducats back in Europe. It's enough to make a merchant's eyes twinkle like a kid in a candy store. But it's not just about the goods, it's about the stories. Tales of strange lands and stranger people have a way of capturing the imagination, turning explorers into legends even before the salt has dried on their boots. When you finally dock in Lisbon, the crowd is there to greet you. Curious onlookers mingling with merchants, nobles, and the odd street urchin hoping for a scrap of adventure. They're not just here for the spectacle, though, they're here for the news. In an age before Twitter and 24-hour news cycles, your return is the hot topic, the stuff of tavern gossip and court intrigue. What you've seen and done could shift the balance of power, inflate the economy, or even inspire the next wave of explorers. But hold up. Before you start picturing yourself as the rock star of the 15th century, remember the stakes. Your tales of adventure might be met with cheers, but they're also scrutinized with a level of skepticism that would make a seasoned detective proud. The Crown wants to know if the investment was worth it. Did you secure new trade routes? Any new lands to claim in the name of Portugal? And most importantly, where's the money? Because let's face it, for all the romanticism of exploration, it's really about the bottom line. Your reception is a mixed bag. Successfully return with a bounty, and you might be showered with rewards, titles, land grants, maybe even a knighthood if you're lucky. King Manuel I, the reigning monarch, isn't shy about rewarding successful explorers. After all, Vasco da Gama got the title of Admiral of the Seas of Arabia, Persia, India, and all the Orient after his successful voyage to India. It sounds grandiose, but it comes with real perks, like a hefty pension and a place in the annals of history. But woe betide the explorer who returns empty-handed or, worse, not at all. Failure isn't just a personal disappointment, it's a national embarrassment. Ships and crews are expensive, and a failed expedition can sour the public mood faster than a barrel of bad wine. The pressure isn't just on you, it's on your patrons, the merchants who bankrolled your journey in hopes of striking it rich. They're not exactly forgiving if you return with tales of storms and scurvy, but no tangible returns. And let's not forget the politics. Your success isn't just your own, it's a feather in the cap of your supporters back home, a way to curry favour and climb the ever-shifting ladder of courtly influence. Failure, on the other hand, can see you cast aside, your name a cautionary tale of hubris and misfortune. It's a delicate dance, this return to civilization, where the line between hero and has-been is thinner than a sailor's patience after months at sea. Now, about those tales of adventure. They have a life of their own once they hit the streets. The public loves a good story, and the more fantastical, the better. You spin yarns of exotic animals, grand cities, and the occasional brush with death. But let's be real, some of these tales are about as factual as a fish tale from your local pub. You've got to jazz it up a bit. After all, who wants to hear about the endless days of staring at the horizon or the monotonous diet of hardtack and salted meat? In the retelling, your mundane encounters become epic battles. Your negotiations with local leaders are elevated to diplomatic masterstrokes. The line between fact and fiction blurs, and soon even you start to believe the hype. It's a narrative as intoxicating as a bottle of the finest port wine, and just as prone to leaving you with a headache the next day. Yet, despite the embellishments, the tales serve a purpose. They inspire the next generation of explorers and merchants, fueling a sense of national pride and ambition. Portugal, once a scrappy underdog, is now a burgeoning maritime power. Its ships the envy of Europe, its explorers the rock stars of their day. The mythos of the explorer as a hero is born, a figure of daring and adventure, celebrated in song and story. But let's not forget the harsh realities tucked beneath the shimmering veneer of legend. The return to Lisbon isn't just about glory, it's also about reckoning with the costs. For every explorer who returns with riches, there are those who don't return at all. The ocean is a harsh mistress, and the toll it takes on human life is staggering. Shipwrecks, disease, and hostile encounters claim lives, leaving behind grieving families and communities. It's a sobering reminder that the age of exploration is as much about loss as it is about discovery. And what of the lands and peoples you've encountered? The stories you tell shape perceptions, often painting a picture of the exotic other that feeds into Europe's burgeoning colonial ambitions. It's a narrative that justifies conquest and exploitation, cloaked in the guise of discovery and civilization. The indigenous peoples, their cultures and histories, become footnotes in the grand saga of exploration, their voices drowned out by the roar of the returning fleet. As you stand on the docks, the salt air, a reminder of your journey, you're caught between worlds, the familiar cobblestones of Lisbon and the distant lands that now feel like a part of your very being. The horizon still calls, a siren song promising more adventures, more discoveries, more stories to tell. But for now, you're home, and the tales you weave will echo through the halls of power and the streets of the city, shaping the future in ways you can scarcely imagine. In the grand tapestry of history, your return is but a single thread, yet one that illuminates the larger picture of a world on the brink of transformation. The age of exploration is far from over, and the horizon is as tantalizing as ever. So take a moment, savor the triumph and the turmoil of your journey, and prepare for whatever comes next. Because in this age of discovery, there's always another horizon waiting to be explored, another story waiting to be told. And so, as you stand on the cobblestones of Lisbon, with the salty breeze whispering tales of distant lands, it's time to look at the bigger picture. What's the real legacy of those daring 15th-century Portuguese explorers? Spoiler alert, it's a mixed bag of triumphs, trials, and a fair amount of turmoil. First, the good stuff. These voyages were game changers. The Portuguese were like the Silicon Valley of the seas, pioneering new trade routes that reshaped the global economy. Before Vasco da Gama found the sea route to India in 1498, the spice trade was dominated by overland routes controlled by middlemen who could make Jeff Bezos look like a bargain shopper. Da Gama's route slashed costs, making spices more affordable and accessible in Europe. We're talking about markups dropping from astronomical to merely outrageous. A pound of spices could still cost a small fortune, but now, at least, it was a fortune more Europeans could afford. These expeditions also kick-started what can only be described as the original globalization. Portuguese ships didn't just carry spices back home, they transported ideas, technologies, and even people, igniting cultural exchanges that would forever alter societies on both sides of the world. The Portuguese introduced Europe to new foods like corn and potatoes, which would eventually become staples. And let's not forget sugar, which, despite its sweet reputation, fueled an insatiable demand that led to darker chapters of history, like the transatlantic slave trade. But let's not kid ourselves. These voyages weren't just about the thrill of discovery or the nobility of cultural exchange. There were imperial motives lurking beneath the surface, as murky as the depths of the Atlantic. The romanticized image of explorers as intrepid heroes often glosses over their role as agents of empire. The truth is, they were the advance guard of colonial expansion, planting flags and staking claims on lands that were already inhabited. This wasn't some friendly neighborhood bake sale, it was the early stages of European imperialism. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 is a prime example of this imperial mindset. With a flick of the papal pen, the world was divided between Spain and Portugal like a giant game of Risk where the indigenous peoples didn't get to roll the dice. This treaty drew an imaginary line down the globe, giving Portugal control over lands to the east, which included parts of Africa, Asia, and eventually Brazil. It was a bold move, one that assumed the rest of the world was up for grabs, ignoring the sovereignty of those who already lived there. And here's where things get dicey. The explorers' journals might read like adventure novels, but the reality was often far grimmer. The Portuguese encounters with indigenous peoples were a mixed bag of trade, coercion, and conflict. They brought new goods and technologies, yes, but also diseases and firearms. The latter often tipped the scales in their favor during disputes, leading to conquest and colonization. The indigenous societies faced upheaval, their ways of life irrevocably changed by the arrival of these sea-born strangers. The economic boom for Portugal was undeniable. By the 16th century, Lisbon was a bustling hub of trade, its coffers swelling with wealth from the east. But this prosperity came at a steep price. The exploitation of resources and people in colonized lands set a precedent for centuries of colonialism, leaving scars that still affect global relations today. The Portuguese weren't just building an empire, they were laying the groundwork for a world divided by power and profit. So, what lessons do these historical events offer us today? For starters, they remind us that global connections can be both a boon and a bane. The age of exploration opened up the world, making it smaller and more interconnected. It's a tale as old as time. The pursuit of profit and power often walks hand in hand with progress, leaving a trail of both triumph and tragedy. The romanticized narratives of brave explorers mask the imperial motives and the cultural clashes that accompanied them. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white, it's painted in shades of grey. As modern-day adventurers of a different sort navigating the digital seas of the 21st century, we face similar questions about the ethics of expansion and the impact of our global footprint. We're more connected than ever, yet the lessons of the past about exploitation, inequality, and the responsibility we have to each other are as relevant as they were in the days of the Portuguese explorers. In the end, the legacy of 15th-century Portuguese exploration is a tapestry of contradictions. It's a story of courage and curiosity, of economic boom and cultural exchange. But it's also a cautionary tale of imperial ambition and the consequences of viewing the world as an untapped resource to be claimed and controlled. As you reflect on these voyages, remember that every horizon holds both promise and peril. The true measure of progress isn't just in the discoveries we make, but in how we choose to share the world we uncover. So here you are, back on Lisbon's familiar cobblestones, with tales of adventure echoing in your mind. As you contemplate the vast sea of history, remember that it's not just the stories themselves that matter, but the lessons they teach us about where we've been and where we're headed. After all, the horizon isn't just a line on the map. It's a mirror reflecting the best and worst of humanity, daring us to navigate it with wisdom and grace. Safe travels, and may your compass always point true. In the year 1469, in the dusty lanes of Talwandi, a small Punjabi village that today finds itself within the borders of Pakistan as Nankana Sahib, something rather ordinary happened. A baby was born. But, as with many stories that start with the mundane, this one had a twist. This newborn, Nanak, was destined to shake up the religious landscape, challenging age-old customs with the audacity of someone who hadn't yet learned to colour within the lines. Imagine that. A world where a crying baby would one day make grown men ponder the meaning of life. Nanak's family was part of the Hindu Khatri caste, which, in the social hierarchy, was like being the manager at a mid-sized department store. Not at the top, but definitely not the guy mopping the floors either. His parents, Kalyan Chand Das Bedi, better known as Meta Kalu, and Mata Tripta, were probably hoping little Nanak would grow up to be something respectable, like a merchant or an accountant. But the universe had other plans that included a fair bit of wandering and a lot of pondering. Now, Talwandi wasn't just any village. It was a melting pot of religions, as diverse as the spices in a well-cooked curry. Hinduism was the main dish, but Islam was there to add a bit of flavour, given that the region had been under Muslim rule for a couple of centuries. This blend meant that young Nanak was exposed to a plethora of religious ideas, like a kid in a candy store with no parental supervision. It was an environment ripe for spiritual questioning, which Nanak seemed to have been born ready for. From a young age, Nanak exhibited a curiosity that was as relentless as a cat's determination to knock over a glass of water. One of the earliest signs that Nanak wasn't cut from the same cloth as everyone else was his infamous refusal to wear the sacred thread, or janu. In Hindu culture, this thread was a big deal, a rite of passage marking a boy's entry into spiritual and educational life. Think of it as a B-grade version of a bar mitzvah. But Nanak, with a wisdom beyond his years or perhaps just a healthy dose of teenage rebellion, questioned the whole charade. He argued that external symbols were pointless if the internal virtues weren't in place. What good was a thread if it didn't prevent you from being a jerk? It's worth noting that in 15th century Punjab, challenging social norms was akin to playing fetch with a tiger. Yet here was this kid, barely out of diapers, poking the societal beast with a stick. His refusal wasn't just a rebellious phase, it was a sign of his deep-seated belief that spirituality transcended ritual. This was the first of many instances where Nanak would choose principles over tradition, making him a bit of a trendsetter for spiritual minimalism. Despite his penchant for challenging norms, young Nanak wasn't a troublemaker. In fact, he was more likely to be found wandering the fields, lost in contemplation rather than causing mischief. His love for nature was as evident as the sun on a cloudless day. He'd often venture out alone, seemingly conversing with the universe itself. These jaunts into the wilderness weren't just about escaping chores. They were the early foundations of what would later become a life dedicated to meditation and introspection. But let's not romanticize this too much. It's easy to imagine Nanak as some kind of medieval Buddha, sitting under a tree in perfect zen. The reality was probably a bit more relatable. Picture a young boy, dirt on his clothes, staring at the sky, wondering why people couldn't just be decent to one another. In a world where religious conflicts often meant bloodshed, such thoughts were revolutionary. This early phase of Nanak's life set the stage for his future teachings. He didn't just challenge the status quo, he questioned the very core of what people believed in. And he did it with a kind of calm defiance that made it difficult to dismiss him as just another rebellious youth. His refusal to wear the sacred thread was a microcosm of his larger philosophy, one that would eventually lead to the founding of Sikhism, a religion that emphasizes internal purity over external ritual. So, there you have it. The early life of Guru Nanak wasn't just a series of quaint anecdotes about a village boy with big ideas. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking, an approach that would ripple across centuries and continents. From the dusty streets of Talwandi to the bustling lanes of global cities today, Nanak's legacy continues to question, to challenge, and to inspire. And all of it began with a simple refusal to wear a thread, a small act with a monumental impact. With threads of rebellion already woven into the tapestry of his life, Nanak's teenage years were anything but mundane. Enter the world of retail, where teenage Nanak found himself behind the counter of a small store. Now, if you think this was a typical teenage job, think again. This wasn't the modern gig economy with its coffee-fetching internships. This was a time when keeping the books was literally about keeping books, big, hefty ledgers that weighed as much as a small dog. Nanak's job as a storekeeper was supposed to ground him, provide a little structure, and maybe even instill in him the virtues of commerce. Sure, a steady job might have kept other teenagers out of trouble, but for Nanak, it became another platform for his burgeoning philosophy. His dealings at the store were marked by an honesty that was as refreshing as a cold drink on a hot Punjabi afternoon. His customers adored him, not just because he gave fair deals, but because he insisted on fairness like it was the latest fashion trend. His honesty earned him admirers who saw him as a breath of fresh air in the stale world of profit margins and haggling, but it also earned him critics who thought he was a little too liberal with the store's assets. And then came the infamous incident that would cement Nanak's reputation as a mystic accountant, a young man with one foot in the material world and the other in the spiritual realm. It all started innocently enough. Nanak, in his trademark fashion, decided to distribute goods to the needy, a gesture that sounds like something straight out of a fairy tale, but which, in reality, was a bookkeeping nightmare. When his employer came knocking, demanding to see the accounts, he found something unexpected, a ledger that didn't quite add up, at least not by earthly standards. Nanak's explanation? He had been keeping a real account, a spiritual ledger that balanced in a currency not recognized by earthly banks. It's the kind of reasoning that would make a modern auditor break out in hives, but for Nanak, it was perfectly logical. His belief was that charity and helping those in need were the real profits worth tallying. Of course, this incident raised more than a few eyebrows and likely caused a few sleepless nights for his employer, who must have wondered if he'd hired an actual saint or just a very creative bookkeeper. This episode wasn't just a whimsical tale to be told over dinner. It was a reflection of Nanak's belief that true value lay in compassion and service, not in the clinking of coins. It also set the stage for his eventual departure from the world of mundane transactions to pursue something far more profound. It's hard not to admire someone who saw the world in such a vivid spectrum of colours when everyone else seemed stuck in black and white. But if his ledger of kindness was a source of admiration, his next act would plunge him into the realm of legend. Nanak's disappearance in the river Bine is one of those tales that straddles the line between history and folklore with all the subtlety of a tightrope walker on a windy day. The story goes that one day, without warning, Nanak vanished while bathing in the river. For 3 days he was gone, prompting the kind of search party that would make even the most seasoned rescue teams raise an eyebrow. When he finally reappeared, he had a revelation that would change everything. He claimed to have been in divine company, receiving a direct message from the Almighty. Now let's pause here. Imagine the sheer audacity of coming back from a 3-day vanishing act, and not just saying you went on a soul-searching trip, but that you had a tete-a-tete with the divine. It's the kind of statement that would get you an eye roll at the dinner table today, but in Nanak's case, it became a cornerstone of his spiritual mission. What exactly happened during those 3 days remains shrouded in mystery, wrapped in the kind of intrigue that would make a mystery novelist salivate. Some say he met God, while others argue it was a moment of profound enlightenment. Regardless of the specifics, what emerged was a man with a mission, a renewed sense of purpose that would lead him to challenge the religious status quo like never before. His message was simple, yet revolutionary. There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, there is only human. A bold statement in a land where religious identities were as entrenched as the roots of an ancient banyan tree. Nanak's revelation was a call to unity, a plea to look beyond labels and embrace the shared humanity that lay beneath. It was a message that resonated then, and quite frankly, it's one that could use a little more airtime today. So, there you have it. Nanak's teenage years were not just about youthful rebellion or quaint acts of charity. They were the crucible in which his spiritual beliefs were forged, setting the stage for a lifetime dedicated to breaking down barriers and building up bridges. And while his story is often wrapped in the gold leaf of legend, at its core, it's a tale of a young man who dared to see the world differently and, in doing so, inspired countless others to do the same. The river Bine might have swallowed him for a time, but it was the world that would come to drink from the fountain of his wisdom for centuries to come. With a renewed sense of purpose and a revelation hotter than a summer's day in Punjab, Nanak was ready to take his teachings on the road, literally. Enter the Udasis, his epic journeys across the Indian subcontinent and beyond. These weren't your average strolls in the park. We're talking about treks that would make a Fitbit explode with exhaustion. Covering over 28,000 kilometers, that's more than 17,000 miles for those keeping score at home, Nanak's travels were less about racking up frequent flyer miles and more about spreading a message of unity and understanding. Now let's get one thing straight. Travel in the 16th century was not for the faint-hearted or those with an aversion to blisters. Forget about smooth highways or comfy modes of transportation. Nanak and his trusty companion, Bhai Mardana, set out on foot. That's right, no Uber chariots or first-class camels. Just their own 2 feet, a musical instrument or two, and more determination than a cat trying to fit into a too small box. Their journey took them through bustling cities and desolate deserts, towering mountains and lush forests, all without the luxury of GPS or Google Maps. And yet, they managed to spread their teachings far and wide, proving that sometimes the best way to reach people is with a simple message and a pair of sturdy shoes. But let's not romanticize this into some kind of spiritual road trip movie. The reality was far grittier. Travel in those days was fraught with dangers. Bandits lurking on every corner, wild animals with a penchant for human snacks, and the constant threat of weather that wasn't about to consult your travel itinerary. And let's not forget the social challenges. Nanak and Mardana weren't just traversing geographical boundaries, they were crossing cultural and religious ones too. Each new region brought its own set of customs, beliefs, and, often, skeptical locals who weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for a couple of wandering mystics. Yet, that's what made Nanak's journey so remarkable. His ability to connect with people, regardless of their background, was like a breath of fresh air in a world suffocating under the weight of religious division. His encounters were as varied as the landscapes he traversed. He debated with Hindu priests, conversed with Muslim scholars, and shared meals with common folk. And he did it all with a dash of humour and a sprinkle of irony, revealing profound truths in a way that was as accessible as a street vendor's samosas. One such encounter was with a group of ascetics who believed in severe penance and self-denial. These guys were the original minimalists, living off a diet that would make even the most dedicated health nut wince. Nanak, with his trademark wit, questioned their practices, asking how starving oneself could lead to spiritual enlightenment. "You can't find God on an empty stomach," he quipped, pointing out that true spirituality came from within, not through external deprivation. It's the kind of logic that would make a guru's head spin, but for Nanak it was just common sense. His dialogues often left his listeners pondering their own beliefs, much like how you might reconsider your life choices after a late-night scroll through social media. He challenged people to look beyond rituals and dogmas, urging them to embrace the humanity that connected them all. It was a message that resonated deeply, spreading faster than rumours in a small town. And while some might have dismissed him as a radical or a dreamer, many more saw the wisdom in his words, paving the way for a new understanding of spirituality. But let's not forget the logistical feats of these journeys. Crossing the Thar Desert, with its relentless sun and shifting sands, was no small task. If you've ever complained about your morning commute, spare a thought for Nanak and Mardana, who had to navigate treacherous terrain with nothing but their wits and a whole lot of faith. And then there were the mountains, towering sentinels that loomed over their path like nature's own version of a toll gate. The Himalayas, with their snow-capped peaks and perilous passes, were both a physical and spiritual challenge. Yet, for Nanak, these obstacles were just stepping stones on his journey to spread a message of love and unity. The economic context of the time also played a role in shaping Nanak's teachings. The Indian subcontinent was a patchwork of kingdoms and empires, each with its own economic realities and social structures. Trade routes crisscrossed the land like veins, pumping wealth and ideas through its body. Yet, amid this prosperity, there was also great poverty and inequality. Nanak's travels exposed him to the harsh realities faced by many, reinforcing his belief in the importance of compassion and service. He saw firsthand the impact of greed and corruption, and his teachings reflected a deep understanding of the need for social justice. Through it all, Nanak maintained his commitment to an inclusive philosophy that transcended religious boundaries. In a world where divisions were as entrenched as the roots of an ancient banyan tree, he preached a message of unity and love that was as radical as it was simple. His journeys were not just about spreading a message, they were about living it. Each step taken, each conversation had, was a testament to his unwavering belief in a world where people were defined not by their faith, but by their humanity. As we wrap up this segment of Nanak's story, it's clear that his Udasis were more than just travels. They were a journey of the soul, a quest for understanding that took him across the length and breadth of a continent and into the hearts of countless people. His experiences shaped his teachings, which continue to resonate today, reminding us of the power of connection and the importance of seeing beyond the labels that divide us. And while this is just one chapter in the epic tale of Guru Nanak, it's a chapter that speaks volumes about the man and his mission. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll dive deeper into the impact of his teachings and the legacy he left behind. Because if there's one thing Nanak taught us, it's that the journey is just as important as the destination. And his journey, it's far from over. With the echoes of his epic journey still resonating in his soul, Guru Nanak returned home, but not to rest on his laurels. Oh no, that would be too mundane for a man who just walked more than 28,000 kilometers to spread a message of unity. Instead, he set his sights on creating a living, breathing embodiment of his teachings, a community where his ideals could flourish. Enter Kartarpur, the original Sikh commune, founded by Nanak around 1522 in what is now Pakistan. Think of it as the world's first spiritual startup, with Nanak as the CEO of coexistence. Now, let's talk about Kartarpur, a place as radical in its conception as it was in its execution. It was not just about building a village, it was about crafting a model society that ran on principles of equality, hard work, and community service. Picture a utopia where societal norms got a good shake-up, and people actually sat down and shared a meal together, regardless of caste or creed. Imagine that. A dinner party where the guest list included everyone, from kings to commoners, because, in Nanak's eyes, the only VIPs were those with a good heart. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Kartarpur was the langar, a communal meal that was as much about spiritual nourishment as it was about filling bellies. Here's the kicker. In a society where caste divisions were as rigid as a British upper lip, the langar was a culinary equalizer. Everyone ate together, side by side, on the same floor, demolishing the social hierarchies that usually kept people apart. It's said that Nanak personally oversaw these meals, stirring the pot both literally and metaphorically. If there was ever a recipe for social change, this was it. But let's not get too hasty and paint Kartapur as some kind of Neverland where everything was perfect. The reality was a tad more grounded. Building a community from scratch had its fair share of challenges. The economic dynamics were akin to a tightrope walk across the Grand Canyon. Resources had to be managed with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The commune relied on agriculture, ploughing the fields from dawn till dusk, because, let's face it, spiritual enlightenment doesn't plant crops. And yet, amidst the toil, Kartapur thrived, proving that a community based on shared labour and shared values could indeed prosper. People from all walks of life flocked to this village, drawn by the magnetic pull of Nanak's teachings. It wasn't just the promise of a meal that attracted them, it was the promise of a new way of living. In a world where social mobility was usually about as likely as a snowstorm in the Sahara, Kartapur offered a rare glimpse of equality. Nanak's daily life in Kartapur was a blend of the mundane and the miraculous. Of course, the stories of his miracles abound, like the time he supposedly caused a field to grow overnight to feed the hungry. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sounds like the stuff of fairy tales, right? But if you scratch beneath the surface, what you find is a man who inspired such devotion that his followers would do anything to bring his vision to life. His real miracle wasn't bending the laws of nature, it was bending the hearts and minds of those around him. Take, for example, his interactions with skeptics who showed up expecting to debunk the myth of Nanak. One such tale involves a wealthy merchant who, upon hearing about Nanak's message, decided to visit Kartapur, likely expecting some kind of smoke and mirrors act. Instead, he found a simple man leading a simple life, devoid of the pomp and circumstance so often associated with spiritual leaders. Nanak, with his characteristic humility, would engage with these skeptics not through grandiose proclamations, but through quiet conversations over a shared meal. And more often than not, they left as converts, convinced not by miracles, but by the sheer authenticity of his message. But let's not sugarcoat everything. Life in Kartapur wasn't all kumbayas and perfect harmony. There were disputes, challenges, and the occasional clash of egos. Human nature, after all, is a stubborn beast. But through it all, Nanak's teachings served as a guiding light, reminding the community of the larger picture. It was about seeing beyond oneself, about embracing the collective over the individual. Economically, Kartapur was a microcosm of self-sufficiency. The community functioned like a well-oiled machine, each member contributing to the whole. It was a place where the concepts of charity and service were woven into the very fabric of daily life. You see, Nanak wasn't just preaching from a pedestal, he was getting his hands dirty, literally. He worked alongside his followers in the fields, a daily reminder that no task was beneath anyone. And here's a quotable nugget for you. Nanak once said, "The air is the teacher, water the father, and earth the great mother." It's a line that captures his profound respect for the environment, a philosophy that was deeply ingrained in Kartapur's way of life. Long before sustainability became a buzzword, Nanak was advocating for a harmonious relationship with nature. Imagine if today's world leaders took a leaf out of his book, or, rather, his farm. As for the myths of Nanak's miracles, they're like the garnish on an already delicious dish, not necessary, but they add a certain flair. Stories like the one where he turned a boulder into water to quench a dry land might make for great fireside tales, but the real magic lay in how he turned people's perceptions. His legacy wasn't about the supernatural, it was about making the ordinary extraordinary through love, compassion, and understanding. And let's end on this note. The true testament to Nanak's vision was not just in the community he built, but in the enduring legacy he left behind. Kartapur was a seed, and from it grew a movement that would eventually blossom into Sikhism, a faith that continues to advocate for equality, humility, and the shared bond of humanity. Nanak's return home was not the end of his journey, it was the beginning of a legacy that would stretch across time and space, reminding us all of the power of a simple meal shared in unity. Stay tuned, because the story of Guru Nanak doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more layers to peel back, and more truths to reveal in the next chapter of his incredible life. And so, As the dust settled on Katapua's fertile fields and the echoes of shared laughter faded into the twilight, the legacy of Guru Nanak began to take root in ways that few could have foreseen. It's one thing to talk about peace and unity, but quite another to actually live it, especially in a world where social hierarchies were as unyielding as a Victorian corset. Nanak, however, wasn't just another voice in the cacophony of religious discourse. His teachings of equality, service and devotion were a breath of fresh air, an open window in a stuffy room filled with incense and dogma. Nanak's principles were revolutionary, not just for their time, but for any time. Take his emphasis on equality, for instance. In a society where caste dictated your job, your friends, and even your afterlife prospects, Nanak's insistence that everyone was equal in the eyes of the divine was downright scandalous. He didn't just preach it, he lived it. From sharing meals to sharing labour in the fields, he made sure equality wasn't just a concept floating in the ether, but a practical reality on the ground. And then there's the concept of service, or seva as it's called in Sikhism. Nanak turned the idea of social service into a spiritual act, not just a nice thing to do on Sundays. For him, helping others was as vital to the soul as oxygen is to the lungs. He believed that true devotion wasn't measured in hours spent in prayer, but in deeds done in service to humanity. It was a radical shift from the prevalent notion that spirituality involved locking yourself away in a cave or an ivory tower. Now, let's talk devotion. For Nanak, devotion wasn't about blind faith or mechanical rituals. It was about a deep, personal connection with the divine, a two-way street of love and understanding rather than a one-way ticket to pious monotony. He encouraged his followers to engage with the world, to see the divine in the everyday, whether it was in a blade of grass or a helping hand extended to a stranger. Fast forward to today, and you can see how Nanak's teachings still ripple through time, much like that metaphorical pebble tossed into a still pond. Sikhism, the religion that sprouted from those early seeds, continues to emphasize these core principles. Sikhs around the world engage in acts of service, from feeding the hungry to volunteering in disaster zones. The Langar tradition, for instance, serves an estimated 6 million meals every day, proving that Nanak's vision of a world where everyone dines together in harmony isn't just a utopian dream, but a living reality. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Nanak's life and teachings are also wrapped in a layer of myth that can be as thick as a well-made curry. Tales of miraculous deeds and divine encounters abound, adding a layer of mystique to his already fascinating story. While these legends add colour and intrigue, they also risk overshadowing the real, tangible impact of his ideas. After all, it's easy to get lost in the romance of a myth and forget the gritty, day-to-day work that went into building a community based on radical equality and service. The reality is that Nanak's success was as much about timing as it was about inspiration. His teachings emerged at a time when the Indian subcontinent was a simmering pot of social and religious tension. The Mughal Empire was on the rise, and with it came a wave of Islamic influence that often clashed with the Hindu majority. Nanak's message of unity and understanding was a balm for a fractured society, offering a new way to bridge the divides that threatened to tear it apart. Economically, too, his teachings resonated with a populace weary of the rigid caste system that dictated every aspect of life. By promoting the idea that everyone, regardless of their social standing, was capable of divine connection, Nanak provided a spiritual outlet for those who found themselves at the bottom of the social ladder. It was an egalitarian message that resonated deeply with the working class and the marginalized, offering a sense of dignity and purpose that transcended worldly wealth and status. As we draw the curtain on Nanak's earthly journey, it's worth noting that his passing in 1539 was as peaceful as his life was revolutionary. Surrounded by his family and followers, he left this world with the same quiet dignity that had defined his time in it. And just as he had done in life, he left behind a legacy that would continue to grow and inspire long after his physical presence had faded. In the end, Guru Nanak's legacy isn't just carved into the annals of history, it's etched into the hearts of those who continue to follow his teachings. His story is a reminder that true change starts with the individual, but can ripple out to transform the world. It's a testament to the power of living one's values, not just talking about them. And while the myths and legends surrounding his life add a certain allure, it's the real, tangible impact of his ideas that continue to inspire generations. So, whether you're sitting down to a langar meal in a bustling city or volunteering your time in a small village, remember that you're part of a legacy that stretches back centuries to a man who dared to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. In a world that often seems divided beyond repair, Nanak's teachings offer a blueprint for unity, compassion, and understanding. In the grand tapestry of history, Guru Nanak's life is a vibrant thread that continues to weave its way through time, connecting people across cultures, religions, and continents. And while the world has changed dramatically since his days of wandering and preaching, the core of his message remains as relevant as ever, that beneath all our differences, we are all part of the same human family. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth celebrating. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry forward the lessons of Guru Nanak, remembering that while the myths may capture our imagination, it's the reality of his teachings that truly change the world. So go forth, practice a little seva, break a few social barriers, and remember that in the grand scheme of things, we're all just walking each other home. Your eyelids flutter open to the sound of the Pacific waves whispering along the shore. It's early morning in 15th century Polynesia, and while you might be tempted to hit snooze on your imaginary coconut alarm clock, there's a world or ocean of knowledge waiting for you today. First things first, it's time to fuel up. You slide out of your palm frond hammock and make your way to breakfast, a hearty helping of taro and breadfruit. These aren't your average breakfast foods, but hey, they're packed with the energy you'll need to tackle the vast expanse of water stretching endlessly from your island home. As you munch, let's set the scene. You're in a world where the map is more rumour than reality. Forget GPS, your guiding stars are the actual stars and the nearest coast guard. Well, that's a concept centuries away. But here's the kicker. Polynesian navigators didn't just survive this maritime madness, they thrived. Picture this, traversing the world's largest ocean, the Pacific, which clocks in at a casual 63 million square miles. That's a lot of water, yet these navigators made it look like a leisurely paddle to the neighbours. Now, let's bust a myth that's been floating around like driftwood. Some might think these navigators were just lucky sailors who stumbled upon islands by chance, like someone finding a $20 bill in an old pair of jeans. But that's about as accurate as saying a plane pilot just points up and hopes for the best. Polynesian navigation was an art and a science rolled into one. It was a symphony of celestial observations, environmental cues, and directional intuition. These navigators could read the waves like a newspaper, where each ripple and swell told a story about the ocean's secrets. Here's how it worked in practice. You've got your stars, the celestial GPS of the ancient world. These weren't just twinkly decorations in the night sky, but a precise grid system. The stars rise and set in predictable arcs, and Polynesian navigators knew these paths like the back of their hands. Think of it as a cosmic subway map, with constellations like Orion and the Southern Cross acting as key stations. But celestial navigation wasn't just about stargazing. It required a deep understanding of nature's patterns. Navigators observed the ocean swells, noting how different winds created distinct wave patterns. They could even tell when an island was nearby by the way the ocean currents changed. This wasn't just sailing, it was a masterclass in environmental literacy, a skill set that takes years, if not decades, to hone. And then there were the stick charts. Yes, sticks, made from coconut fibres and shells. These charts were a tactile guide to ocean swells and currents. Each navigator crafted their own, a personal map that was as much about feeling as it was about seeing. These charts did not show islands, but rather the sea paths between them. Imagine having a road map that only shows you the highways but none of the destinations. It's a bit like trying to understand rock music without ever hearing a guitar, but for those in the know, it worked. Now, let's add some context to this celestial bonanza. Why did this matter so much? Simply put, the Polynesian islands were not just close-knit communities, they were a sprawling network of trade, culture, and kinship. Navigating these waters wasn't just about survival, it was about connection. Whether it was trading goods, sharing stories, or marrying into distant families, the ocean was not a barrier, but a bridge. This level of navigation mastery meant that Polynesians could voyage thousands of miles, reaching remote islands long before Europeans even dreamed of setting sail. They navigated to Hawaii, Easter Island, and even New Zealand, places that would strike fear into the heart of any sailor without such skill. These voyages weren't haphazard jaunts, but carefully planned expeditions, guided by experts who could read the natural world as effortlessly as you read a street sign. As you finish up your breakfast and prepare for a day of celestial schooling, take a moment to appreciate the sheer scale of this achievement. While others saw the ocean as a daunting mystery, Polynesian navigators saw it as an open road, one they traversed with unmatched skill and audacity. And as the sun rises higher, casting a golden path across the water, you can't help but feel a sense of awe. This is the day you begin to understand not just how they did it, but why it mattered so much. As the sun continues to climb, its golden light revealing the vastness of the Pacific, you begin to see why these oceanic voyages were more than just a daring dance with destiny. They were the lifeblood of Polynesian society, a pulsating network of trade, communication, and cultural exchange. You see, island hopping wasn't just about finding a prettier beach or a change of scenery. No, it was a gritty necessity, an economic engine that kept the wheels of society turning. Let's get to the heart of the matter, survival. The islands, as paradisiacal as they may seem, weren't exactly overstocked with resources. Some lacked essential materials like timber or basalt for tools, while others might have been overflowing with coconuts but desperately in need of fresh genetic stock to avoid, shall we say, overly familiar family reunions. This is where trade came in, transforming the ocean from an intimidating moat into a bustling highway of goods and ideas. Picture this, an armada of canoes converging at a central island, not unlike a floating marketplace on steroids. Here, they'd trade everything from food and tools to stories and songs, each transaction weaving the islands more tightly together. But before you imagine islanders casually zipping around on their canoes like a Sunday drive, let's dive into the logistics of these voyages. First, the canoes themselves. These weren't your average paddle boats. We're talking about double-hulled voyaging canoes, engineering marvels of their time. Constructed with painstaking precision, these vessels were the Formula One cars of the ancient world. A typical voyaging canoe could range from 50 to 100 feet long, capable of carrying up to 80 people along with their cargo. And building one was no weekend project. It required large amounts of timber, often sourced from trees like the koa in Hawaii or the totara in New Zealand. These trees were massive and scarce, meaning the construction of a canoe was a community effort, a labor of love and sheer necessity. And let's not forget the sails, crafted from pandanus leaves woven into intricate, durable mats. Every inch of these canoes was a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that necessity truly is the mother of invention. Yet, these masterpieces didn't come cheap or easy. A single canoe could take months or even years to build, involving entire communities in its creation. It was a venture that required not only resources, but also the collective skills of master carvers, weavers, and navigators. But why go through all this trouble? Well, alongside survival, there was prestige. Successfully completing a voyage was akin to a modern-day space mission. It was a demonstration of prowess and a source of immense social capital. Chiefs and navigators who could lead their people safely across the ocean weren't just leaders. They were legends, carrying the weight of their community's hopes and dreams on their backs. And failure? That wasn't just a bad day at the office. It was a disaster that could cost lives and destabilize entire social structures. This brings us to the social hierarchy aboard these vessels. These weren't democratically run pleasure cruises. They were structured, hierarchical societies at sea. At the top, you had the chief, who was often the sponsor of the voyage, and the master navigator, a combination of scientist, priest, and rock star. Below them were the crew-skilled sailors whose roles were as important as they were varied. Each crew member had a job to do, whether it was managing the sails, steering the canoe, or keeping a lookout for land. The stakes were high, not just personally but politically. Successful voyages expanded the chief's influence and increased his realm's prestige. This was a world where reputation was everything, and a successful navigator was worth his weight in, well, whatever was the most precious commodity of the time. These voyages were political chess games on a grand scale, where each move had consequences that echoed across the islands. The political implications were immense. Alliances were forged and broken over these voyages, marriages arranged, and rivalries kindled. A well-placed marriage alliance could unite clans across islands, creating bonds that ensured peace and mutual prosperity. Conversely, a failed expedition could lead to tension or even conflict. In this way, the ocean was as much a battleground as it was a bridge. So, as you ponder these high-stakes oceanic escapades, remember this. What might seem like a scenic journey to us was a strategic maneuver of epic proportions to them. These voyages were the threads that wove the complex tapestry of Polynesian society, each one a testament to human courage, innovation, and the relentless drive to connect. And as you stand on the shore, watching the sun cast its shimmering trail across the water, you realize that in this world, the ocean was more than just a vast expanse. It was the stage upon which the drama of life played out, in all its glory and peril. So, as you stand on that sun-drenched shore, contemplating the vast ocean frontier and its role as the grand stage for Polynesian exploits, it's time to dive into the myths that swirl around these legendary navigators like the very waves they once conquered. After all, what's history without a little bit of embellishment and a sprinkle of exaggeration? Let's start with the romantic notion of the lone navigator, an intrepid hero defying the gods in the ocean's fury. Picture him standing at the prow, chest puffed out, scanning the horizon with a gaze so intense it could part clouds. Sounds thrilling, right? Well, sorry to burst your bubble, but reality wasn't quite so cinematic. Navigating the Pacific was a team sport, folks. It took a village, literally. Each voyage was a coordinated effort, relying on an entire crew working in harmony. This wasn't some solo act. It was more like an ancient rock band, where every player brought their own instrumental expertise to the performance. And then there's the myth of flawless navigation, those Polynesian mariners who supposedly never missed a beat, guided by an infallible star map. In truth, even the best navigators faced the formidable challenge of the unpredictable elements. Storms could appear out of nowhere, whipping the sea into a frenzy and turning those well-charted waters into a nightmare. Ditto for food shortages. Imagine being weeks into a voyage, rations dwindling faster than your patience, and the nearest island still a distant dream on the horizon. Ever tried fishing in the open ocean with nothing but a handline? Let's just say it's not as easy as they make it look on those survival shows. And let's talk about getting lost at sea. This wasn't just a possibility, it was a terrifying reality. Without modern compasses or GPS, a drift of a few degrees could mean missing your target island by hundreds of miles. The Pacific is a vast expanse after all. 63 million square miles of, oops, I think we took a wrong turn. And while the stars provided a celestial roadmap, they weren't always visible. Cloud cover could obscure the heavens for days, leaving the crew to rely on their wits and the ever-shifting patterns of the ocean currents. Now, here's a fun twist. Some legends suggest navigators had supernatural assistance, employing magical stones or invoking the ocean gods for a smooth journey. It's the kind of story that makes for a great campfire tale. But the truth? These navigators were more scientists than shamans. They relied on generations of accumulated knowledge, an empirical understanding of the stars, winds, and waves to guide them. No magic required, just a lifetime of learning and an uncanny ability to read the natural world. But let's not entirely dismiss the allure of these legends. They served a purpose beyond mere entertainment. Myths provided a way to pass down crucial navigational knowledge, embedding practical wisdom within captivating stories. They were the ancient equivalent of a mnemonic device, ensuring that essential skills were remembered and revered. In a way, these tales were like the original TED Talks, educational, inspiring, and a bit of a spectacle. Still, let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. For every tale of heroic success, there were countless stories of voyages that ended in disaster. Canoes lost to the depths, crews disappearing without a trace. These were the sobering realities that tempered the mythic narratives. The Pacific was a formidable adversary, indifferent to human ambition, and while the navigators were undoubtedly skilled, they were also incredibly lucky to survive its capricious moods. Yet, despite these challenges, the Polynesians persisted, driven by a combination of necessity and an unquenchable spirit of exploration. They were the ultimate risk-takers, adventurers who saw opportunity where others saw only peril. For them, the ocean was both a challenge to be mastered and a partner in their journey, a dynamic, living entity that demanded respect and rewarded those who dared to understand it. As you contemplate this blend of myth and reality, it becomes clear why these navigators captured the imagination of so many. They were the trailblazers of their time, daring to navigate the unknown with only their skills and instincts to guide them. In a world where the line between survival and disaster was razor-thin, they stood as symbols of resilience and ingenuity. So, as the sun reaches its zenith and casts its brilliant light across the vast Pacific expanse, remember this: the myths of Polynesian navigators are more than just stories of daring adventures. They are the echoes of a profound human achievement, a testament to the courage and tenacity required to conquer the world's largest ocean. And while the legends may embellish the truth, they remind us of the indomitable spirit that drove these navigators to venture into the unknown, guided by the stars and perhaps a whisper of the gods. And just as the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting its golden glow over the endless Pacific, you start to see how these intrepid Polynesian voyages were more than just a series of daring escapades. They were the threads weaving together a sprawling tapestry of cultural and genetic exchange across thousands of miles of open ocean. Imagine a grand social experiment where the lab is the Pacific, and the subjects are the countless communities scattered across its islands, each voyage a ripple that reshaped the human landscape. Let's get our hands dirty with some facts. It's estimated that the Polynesians settled over 1,000 islands across the Pacific Ocean, including far-flung places like Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island. This wasn't a haphazard drift, it was deliberate colonization, a pre-GPS version of expansion that would give any empire-building game a run for its money. These weren't just new lands to conquer, they were new worlds to integrate into a complex web of cultural and genetic ties. Now, let's tackle the genetic angle. The Polynesians were like the original geneticists, albeit without the white lab coats and fancy CRISPR tech. They carried with them not just material goods but also their DNA, which mixed and mingled with the genetic pools of the islands they reached. Over generations, this created a rich tapestry of genetic diversity. Modern genetic studies have revealed how these ancient mariners spread their genes far and wide, proving that cultural diffusion was more than just an exchange of ideas. It was an exchange of life itself. But what did this look like on the ground? Or rather, on the sand? Well, each new island settlement was like a blank canvas, a chance to blend old ways with new influences. The Polynesians brought with them their language, arts, and religious beliefs, which mingled with local customs to create something entirely unique. Picture it, a cultural potluck where everyone brings their own dish, and the end result is a feast of flavors you'd be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And let's not gloss over the social dynamics. These voyages weren't just about planting flags and claiming land. They were about creating alliances, sometimes through marriage, sometimes through trade, and occasionally through conflict. Each interaction was a complex negotiation, a high-stakes game where the prize was survival and prosperity. Chiefs who could successfully navigate these social waters, pun intended, often saw their influence grow beyond their home islands, becoming regional power players in a network that spanned the ocean. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. Not every voyage ended in a joyous exchange of lace and luaus. Some encounters were, shall we say, less than friendly. Territorial disputes could erupt, and not every island was thrilled to welcome newcomers, especially if they showed up with more of an invasion vibe than an invitation. It's a reminder that human nature, with all its messiness, has always been a part of our story. In this grand narrative, the ocean was both the highway and the battlefield, a dynamic space where the stakes were as high as the swells. It was a world where the boundaries between friend and foe, ally and adversary were as fluid as the tides themselves. And yet, through it all, the Polynesians managed to create a vast, interconnected society that defies the simplistic labels we often impose on history. But wait, there's more. As if navigating the Pacific wasn't enough of a brain teaser, modern science is starting to catch up with ancient wisdom. Recent studies have shown that Polynesian navigators were onto something with their celestial and environmental methods. Take the art of reading ocean swells, for example. Scientists have discovered that island-induced swells can travel for thousands of miles, providing navigators with a natural GPS long before satellites were twinkles in some engineer's eye. And those stick charts we mentioned earlier? Turns out, they're not just quaint relics, but sophisticated representations of wave patterns and ocean currents that modern scientists are just beginning to understand. It's like finding out your grandma's old cookbook is actually a Michelin star guide to culinary genius. So, while we might have fancy technology today, the fundamental principles of navigation haven't changed all that much. The stars still shine, the waves still roll, and the ocean remains as vast and mysterious as ever. As the sun finally slips beneath the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and purple, you're left with a deep appreciation for the legacy of these ancient mariners. They were more than just travellers, they were pioneers in the truest sense, charting courses not just across the ocean, but through the intricacies of human connection. They remind us that even in the face of the unknown, there's a spirit within us that yearns to explore, to understand, and to connect. And as we look to the future, it's a lesson worth remembering. The journey is as important as the destination. And sometimes, it's the stories we share along the way that truly matter. And so, as the stars begin their nightly dance across the sky, let's turn our gaze to the lasting legacy of those intrepid Polynesian navigators. You might think the era of seafaring daredevils is long gone, left to moulder alongside dusty history books and tales of yore. But hold on to your paddles, because these ancient mariners are far from forgotten. In fact, their techniques and traditions have seen a resurgence that's as vibrant as a tropical sunrise. Let's start with the resurgence of traditional navigation techniques. In a world dominated by Google Maps and GPS, it might sound quaint to rely on the stars and ocean swells, but for some it's nothing short of a cultural renaissance. Take the Waka Moana, or traditional Polynesian voyaging canoes, which have made a remarkable comeback. Groups like the Polynesian Voyaging Society have been at the forefront, reviving the art of wayfinding without modern instruments. It's like ditching your smartphone for a rotary phone and discovering it's not just retro but revolutionary. One of the most famous contemporary voyages was undertaken by the Hoekliara, a double-hulled canoe that embarked on a worldwide journey from 2014 to 2017, covering over 40,000 nautical miles and visiting more than 150 ports in 23 countries. This wasn't just a joyride, it was a statement, a testament to the enduring relevance of traditional Polynesian knowledge. It reminded the world that these techniques are not relics of the past but living traditions that still have much to teach us. And then there's the recognition by UNESCO, which in 2010 acknowledged the art of traditional Polynesian navigation as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. That's a mouthful, but what it means is this. The world has officially recognized the incredible cultural and historical significance of these navigation techniques. It's like getting an Oscar for Best Original Method of Not Getting Lost at Sea. This recognition not only honors the navigators of the past, but ensures that their knowledge is preserved for future generations. But why does this all matter? In our hyper-connected world, why should we care about stars and canoes? Well, it turns out that these ancient techniques offer more than just a nostalgic nod to the past. They provide a powerful framework for understanding our relationship with the environment. Navigational methods that rely on reading the natural world encourage a deeper connection with our surroundings, a lesson that's increasingly relevant as we face the looming challenges of climate change and environmental degradation. And speaking of relevance, let's draw a few modern-day parallels. Navigating today's world with its political and social complexities can feel as daunting as crossing the Pacific in a canoe. Consider the art of negotiation, whether it's in global diplomacy or local business. The Polynesian navigators knew that successful voyages depended on cooperation, communication, and mutual respect, principles that are just as crucial in our boardrooms and political halls as they were on the open sea. Then there's the lesson in resilience. The Polynesians were masters of adaptation, adjusting their sails to the shifting winds of the Pacific. In an era where technological and cultural shifts happen at breakneck speeds, the ability to adapt and innovate is more valuable than ever. We might not be building canoes from scratch, but we're certainly sailing through a sea of change. Of course, we can't ignore the myths and legends that have enshrouded these navigators. They add a certain allure, a romantic veneer to the hard facts of history. But behind every legend is a kernel of truth, and behind every tale of supernatural navigation is a story of human ingenuity and endurance. It's a reminder that while myths may embellish, they also inspire. They challenge us to look beyond the horizon, to seek out the unknown with courage and curiosity. As we wrap up this journey through time, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these ancient mariners. They were pioneers, not just of the ocean, but of the human spirit. Their stories remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven with the threads of human endeavour and imagination. And as we navigate the seas of our own lives, we can draw inspiration from their example, finding our own stars to guide us through the darkness. So, as the evening deepens and the stars burn brightly above, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Polynesian navigators. They were trailblazers in every sense of the word, charting courses that not only spanned the ocean, but connected cultures and generations. Their legacy is a testament to the power of knowledge, tradition, and the unquenchable human desire to explore. And as we continue to sail through the challenges of our modern world, their story serves as a beacon, reminding us that with skill, courage, and a touch of audacity, we too can navigate the vast unknowns that lie ahead. The rooster's crow shatters the quiet morning in your 9th-century Mercian village, pulling you from the embrace of sleep. You rise, not because you want to, but because that's the rhythm of a blacksmith's life. You've got iron to tame, and the day won't wait for you. As you step out into the crisp air, the village begins to stir, a blend of human and animal sounds weaving a familiar morning symphony. In Mercia, the blacksmith is no mere tradesperson. You're the village's heartbeat. Farmers, warriors, and builders rely on the tools you forge. The plough that breaks the soil, the sword that defends the realm, the nails that hold homes together, all start in your forge. Think of yourself as the unsung hero of medieval infrastructure. If you ever wanted a job with job security, blacksmithing is it. As you approach your forge, let's talk materials. Iron is your bread and butter, or perhaps your meat and mead. It's not just any hunk of metal. It's iron bloom, a spongy mass extracted from bog ore, and it's as temperamental as a cat on a rainy day. You'll need charcoal too, because in the 9th century, coal was the stuff of dreams. Charcoal, made from wood, is your fuel of choice, and its production is a craft in itself. Not just any wood will do. You use hardwoods like oak or beech, which burn hot and long, providing the intense heat necessary to coax iron into submission. But it's not all about pounding metal like a medieval rock star. There's a delicate dance between crafting and trading. Your village doesn't run on coins just yet, it's more of a barter economy. It's a world where a well-crafted tool could be exchanged for a bushel of grain or a slab of bacon. But don't romanticize it. This system means you've got to be as sharp in negotiation as you are with a hammer. Fail to barter well, and your family could be eating gruel while the farmer feasts on your hard work. Here's the myth-busting moment. You're not some soot-covered solitary figure working in a smoky cave. Your forge is the hub of the community. People drop by not just for tools, but for news, gossip, and a good-natured ribbing. In fact, as you start the fire, you overhear the local reeve chatting about the latest Mercian skirmishes with the Danes. That's right. While you're bending metal, Mercia is bending under the pressure of Viking raids. The political backdrop of your daily grind is anything but dull. As you pump the bellows, let's dig into the economic context. Your role is pivotal, but the economy around you is shifting. Coins are starting to make an appearance, but for now, most transactions are still face-to-face exchanges. You might trade a ploughshare for a few chickens, or a set of nails for a cask of ale. It's a system that requires wit and a good reputation. Trust is your currency, and your skill is your collateral. You're not alone, though. You've got an apprentice, maybe two, who are learning the ropes. They're the eager hands ready to fetch tools, manage the fire, and hammer out the basics. In return, they get the privilege of sleeping in the corner of your workshop and eating whatever scraps are left after you've finished. It's not a cushy internship by any means, but it's how you learned, and it's how they'll learn. As the forge heats up, you start with a simple task: nails. They might seem minor, but in a world where every structure is wooden, nails are the linchpins of construction. You work the iron with rhythmic precision. your hammer striking like a heartbeat, every blow echoing in the small space. There's a zen to it, a meditation in motion. You lose yourself in the task, the world narrowing to the anvil and the glow of molten metal. But there's no time to linger in this meditative state. The village is waking up, and soon the farmers will come calling for tools to tend their fields. You'll need to be ready to haggle a fair trade for your wares. So, while the fire roars and the iron heats, you mentally prepare for the bartering sessions that are as much a part of your day as the metalwork. In a world without price tags, every transaction is a performance, and you, my friend, are the star of this medieval marketplace theatre. Remember, in this society, your work doesn't just support families, it's a bulwark against chaos. A broken plough could mean a failed harvest, and a failed harvest could mean famine. A blunt sword could mean defeat, and defeat could mean subjugation or worse. In the grand scheme of things, you're not just making tools, you're crafting the future of your community. That's a lot of pressure for a day's work, but hey, it beats being a serf. As the sun climbs higher, the village comes alive, and you're ready to face whatever the day throws at you. Just another day in the life of the Saxon blacksmith, where every clang of the hammer is a note in the symphony of survival. So, as the sun inches higher in the sky, you grab your trusty hammer and prepare for the day's real work. Let's dive into the blacksmith's toolbox, which, let's be honest, is more impressive than Batman's utility belt. First up, the anvil. Picture a solid block of iron weighing anywhere from 50 to 500 pounds. Yes, it's your iron muse, your steadfast partner in this dance of fire and metal. And while it may look like a simple hunk of iron, it's actually the culmination of centuries of metallurgical know-how. The flat top is where the magic, or rather the science, happens, but don't ignore the horn, that curvy bit, or the hardy hole, both essential for shaping metal like a pro. Then there's the hammer, your wand of transformation. It might not cast spells, but in your hands it turns rough iron into something useful, sometimes even beautiful. Don't think of it as just one hammer, though. You've got a whole family of them. The cross-peen, the ball-peen, each with its own special place in the metal-bending symphony. And let's not forget the tongs. Without them, you'd be playing a game of hot potato with molten iron, a game where nobody wins. These are your iron fingers, indispensable for holding and turning glowing hot metal. Now, about the techniques, forging and welding. Forget about the high-tech welding torches of today. In the 9th century, welding was all about fire welding. You'd heat 2 pieces of iron until they're nearly molten, then hammer them together until they bond. Sound simple? It's not. It's like trying to make 2 cats share a bed. They'll resist unless you know exactly how to coax them together. Forging, on the other hand, is the art of shaping metal by heating and hammering it. It's a bit like sculpting, except Michelangelo never risked first-degree burns from a rogue piece of granite. Speaking of burns, let's talk risks. The forge is not exactly a spa day. Burns are as common as blisters, and both are badges of honor or stupidity depending on the day. And then there's the need for physical strength. Ever tried swinging a 5-pound hammer for hours? Your arms will look like they belong to a Viking by the end of the week. It's a workout regimen that makes modern CrossFit look like a gentle stroll through the park. But why do you put up with all this? Because every ploughshare and sword you make is a thread in the tapestry of village life. The local economy isn't just supported by your work, it's utterly dependent on it. Without your forge, the farmer's plough wouldn't slice through soil, and the warrior's sword wouldn't slice through, well, the enemy. It's a harsh world out there, and you're the unsung supplier of civilization's tools. Now, let's tackle a myth that's as persistent as it is intriguing: blacksmiths as sorcerers. There's something undeniably magical about turning raw iron into something both functional and formidable, but magic it is not. It's chemistry, physics, and a whole lot of elbow grease. Yet the myth persists, perhaps because the transformation seems so miraculous to those who don't know the secret handshake of the trade. Your skills have sparked whispers of witchcraft, but the reality is far less mystical and far more grimy. At this point, you're probably ready to roll your eyes at the romanticized image of the solitary, soot-covered blacksmith. You're not a loner. You're an integral part of the community. People rely on you in ways they don't even realize, and while they might joke about your gruff exterior, they know you're the linchpin holding their world together, one hammer blow at a time. As the day progresses and the sun beats down harder, the heat from your forge feels like an inferno. But you press on because that's what a Saxon blacksmith does. You're not just forging metal, you're forging the future. Every clang of the hammer is a promise of survival, of resilience, and maybe even prosperity. So while the legends may paint you as a mystical figure, the truth is you're something far more important, a craftsman of necessity in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. As the afternoon approaches, your mind wanders to the wider world. Mercia is not just a sleepy patch of earth, it's a player in the grand stage of 9th century geopolitics. Viking raids are a constant threat, and every piece of armor you forge might just tip the scales in the next skirmish. It's a heavy burden, but there's satisfaction in knowing your work matters. With each tool and weapon, you're not just supporting the local economy, you're contributing to an entire kingdom's defense strategy. Take that modern-day office jobs. No TPS reports here. And as you wrap up another piece, you pause for a moment, just long enough to consider the paradox of your existence. You're a craftsman, a community cornerstone, and a reluctant mystic, all rolled into one. The reality of your work is painstakingly laborious, yet the myth surrounding it adds a touch of romance that makes it all the more intriguing. You're not just hammering iron, you're shaping history, one red-hot piece at a time. As the day winds down, you're left with a sense of accomplishment, and maybe a few new burns to show for it. The forge cools, the fire dims, and you know tomorrow will bring more of the same. But that's okay, because in this world, where every clang of the hammer is a heartbeat for the village, you wouldn't have it any other way. You may not be a sorcerer, but in your own way, you're a magician of the mundane, and that's a pretty powerful role to play. As the forge dims and your mind drifts from the rhythmic clang of metal, you realize that blacksmithing in 9th century Mercia isn't just about shaping iron. It's about shaping society too. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, you're a crucial thread, weaving connections through every plowshare and sword you forge. Your skill places you smack dab in the center of your community's social networks, a place where your reputation is as vital as the anvils you hammer on. You see, in the Saxon social hierarchy, you're both a rock star and a bit of an enigma. Essential, yet elusive. Everyone needs you, but not everyone understands you. Blacksmiths are often seen as the village's backstage alchemists, transforming the mundane into the magnificent. To the untrained eye, it might even seem like witchcraft. And who doesn't love a good supernatural whisper? Socially, you're the linchpin holding everything together. You're the guy who knows everyone's business, not because you're nosy, but because your forge is where the village congregates. It's the 9th century version of the water cooler. While the reeve might swing by to discuss land disputes or the latest Viking threat, the farmers are here to trade gossip along with their grain. This gives you a front-row seat to the social dynamics of your time. You're the keeper of secrets, the broker of information, and occasionally the referee in a neighborly spat. Now, let's pivot to the political landscape of 9th century Mercia, a kingdom caught in a Game of Thrones long before HBO made it cool. We're talking a region constantly in flux, with kings like Burgred trying to hold back the Viking tide while maintaining some semblance of order. The power dynamics are as volatile as your forge on a windy day. And in this world, your work is more than mere craftsmanship. It's a strategic asset. Every tool and weapon you produce might just tip the balance in a skirmish or secure the harvest that feeds the warriors. Being a blacksmith means you're indirectly involved in these power plays. Your allegiance matters. If you're not on good terms with the local lord or the reeve, your life could get complicated fast. It's not just about metal, it's about knowing the right people. Economically, you're in a sweet spot or a precarious one, depending on how you look at it. With coins starting to circulate more, the barter system you've grown accustomed to is evolving. You're in a unique position to leverage this change. Your tools are in constant demand, and that gives you a certain leverage. You might trade a newly forged axe for a couple of silver pennies instead of a barrel of ale, marking the slow but steady shift towards a money-based economy. But let's bust another myth while we're at it. The idea that medieval life was a simple barter and trade affair is as misleading as a wooden sword. Sure, bartering was common, but coins were already starting to make their shiny appearance, especially in towns and trade centres. Mercia, being a significant kingdom, was no stranger to the clink of coins, even if they weren't as common as chickens or grain in rural areas. And speaking of chickens, let's not forget the sheer unpredictability of village life. You've got a rooster that crows at the wrong time, a cow that wanders into the forge, and kids who think your hammer is a toy. It's chaotic, noisy, and occasionally smelly, but it's life. And you're at the center, turning that chaos into order with each clang of your hammer. As you stand there, half listening to the chatter around you, you realize that in this world, where survival often hangs by a thread, you're not just a craftsman, you're a craftsman with influence. The tools you create are the backbone of the economy, the weapons the shield against invaders, and the nails the binders of homes. You're not merely a part of the community, you're integral to its very existence. And there you have it, the strange duality of being a Saxon blacksmith. You're both the unsung hero and the mysterious figure behind the curtain. Your work is tangible, yet the myths about what you do add a layer of intrigue that makes people keep coming back. It's a role that offers power without the trappings of nobility, influence without the need for a crown. As you stoke the forge for another round, you know you wouldn't trade it for any other job in the world, even if it means dodging the occasional cow. You take a deep breath, savouring the mix of scents, burning charcoal, sweat, and a hint of roasted meat from the market, a reminder that even in 9th century Mercia, life goes on beyond the clang of your hammer. But today, the rhythm of your work is subtly shifting. The Viking threat looms larger than ever, and with it comes an increased demand for weapons. Swords are now the hottest item on the medieval wish list, and your forge is the medieval version of an arms dealership. Let's face it, the Vikings are the rock stars of raiders. Fearsome, unpredictable, and about as welcome as a wasp at a picnic. Their longships glide down rivers like silent sharks, and their raids are swift, brutal, and often devastating. For the blacksmith, this means a shift in priorities. Plowshares are still essential, but swords and spears are now cutting to the front of the queue. It's not that people suddenly have an urge to play medieval Rambo, it's survival 101. If you're not armed, you're vulnerable. And in these times, vulnerability is a luxury no one can afford. Now, contrary to popular tales, you're not just cranking out Excaliburs on demand. Each sword is a labour of love, and labour is the operative word here. A single sword can take days to craft. First there's the iron bloom you have to refine, then the meticulous shaping and sharpening. And don't forget the hilt and guard, often made from wood or bone, materials that require their own level of finesse. These are not just weapons, they're works of art, albeit art with a very pointed purpose. The political climate adds another layer of complexity to your work. Mercia, like the rest of the English kingdoms, is embroiled in a tangled web of alliances and enmities. The kings and ealdormen are playing a game of chess with real lives, and your forge is part of the strategy board. King Burgred, for example, is busy keeping the peace or trying to, while simultaneously fending off the Vikings. He's the guy who's got to make sure the warriors have the gear they need to protect the realm, which means your services are more than just appreciated, they're essential. Back to those romanticized tales of blacksmiths in songs and stories. Sure, they paint a picture of a noble artisan forging mighty weapons with a flick of the wrist and a twinkle in the eye. But they conveniently leave out the back-breaking labour, the constant pressure to produce, and the reality that your role in society is as much about politics as it is about craftsmanship. The truth is, every sword you forge is a gamble on the future. Is it going to save a life, take one, or end up buried with its owner in some forgotten battlefield? Economic realities add another wrinkle. As demand for weapons increases, so does the cost of materials. Iron doesn't grow on trees, and neither does the charcoal you need to fuel your forge. You're constantly bartering for raw materials, striking deals as sharp as the blades you create. And with coins starting to circulate more widely, you're finding yourself in the middle of an economic shift, one that could either fortify your standing or leave you scrambling like a chicken that's lost its head. Speaking of chickens, let's talk about the gritty, unvarnished truth of your day-to-day. The forge isn't the romantic setting of tales, it's hot, dirty, and downright dangerous. Burns are your constant companions, and if you're not careful, a stray spark could turn your workshop into a medieval bonfire. It's a relentless grind, more marathon than sprint, and unlike in stories, there's no magic involved, just sweat, skill, and maybe a few choice words when the iron doesn't behave. And yet, the myth of the blacksmith persists, as attractive as it is misleading. Perhaps it's the allure of transformation, turning raw, unyielding metal into something with a sharp edge and a purpose. Or maybe it's the idea that in a world teetering on chaos, your work brings a semblance of order. You're crafting not just tools and weapons, but hope, security, and a future for your community, one hammer blow at a time. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, you're keenly aware that your work is part of a larger narrative, one where the stakes are high and the outcomes uncertain. The Viking raids may be the headline act, but the underlying story is one of resilience and adaptation. In crafting the tools of war, you're also shaping the tools of peace, because when the fighting's done, those ploughshares still need to turn the soil. And so you carry on, forging a path through history with each clang of the hammer, knowing that in the grand scheme of things, you're not just making swords, you're forging a legacy. The day's end is near, and as you wipe the soot from your brow, you ponder the paradox of your existence. A blacksmith in 9th century Mercia is both a cog in the machine and a craftsman of destiny. You're not just a witness to history, but an active participant shaping the tools that will shape the world. And that's a role worth every burn and blister, every negotiation and new alliance. Because while the myths might gloss over the grit, you know the truth. In a world dancing on the edge of chaos, you're not just holding the line, you're forging it. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the village, you take a moment to reflect on the day's toil. The forge stands silent now, a hulking iron beast temporarily at rest until the rooster's crow summons it back to life. The rhythmic hammering might have ceased, but the echoes linger, a reminder of the ceaseless cycle in which you play a pivotal role. Today's work is done, but the legacy of your labours stretches far beyond the confines of time. Let's take a step back and gaze upon the tapestry of history, where you, the Saxon blacksmith, are more than a thread. You're a vibrant strand weaving through centuries. Fast forward a millennium or so, and you'll find your descendants pounding away in forges that look eerily similar, and yet the world around them would be unrecognizable. From steam engines to assembly lines, the Industrial Revolution transformed blacksmithing from a craft into a cornerstone of mass production. The skills you honed under charcoal and sweat evolved into the mechanized marvels of modern metalwork, where precision is measured in microns, not millimeters. Yet, with all this technological wizardry, the romance of the blacksmith endures. There's something timeless about a craft that starts with fire and ends with form. Today, artisanal blacksmiths are celebrated for their skill in bespoke creations, from handcrafted railings to intricate jewelry. It's a nod to the past, a whisper that says, we may have moved on, but we haven't forgotten. The tools have changed, but the dance between hammer and anvil remains a constant. And what about those myths, the ones that cast you as a mystical figure? They're surprisingly resilient. The image of the blacksmith as a semi-magical being persists, perhaps because the transformation of raw metal into a weapon or tool seems so astonishing to the uninitiated. In medieval times, your forge was seen as a place of mystery and power, where the line between science and sorcery blurred like the edges of a coal fire. Today, while no one's claiming you're casting spells, the allure of your craft still captivates the imagination. Maybe it's the idea that, in a world dominated by the virtual, the tangible creation of something useful and beautiful feels like magic, ironically, in its most grounded form. Let's sprinkle some numbers on this legacy. In your time, a well-crafted sword could take weeks to complete, each step demanding skill and precision. Fast forward to the industrial era, where a factory could churn out hundreds of swords in the same period. Now, with CNC machines and laser cutters, precision is a keystroke away, and what once took a day can be done in minutes. Yet, despite these advances, the bespoke handmade sword remains a luxury item, a testament to the enduring value of craftsmanship. The economic context is another layer to this saga. In your day, the village economy was about survival, bartering a sickle for a sack of barley to make it through the winter. Nowadays, blacksmithing might be a niche career, but it's also a lucrative one for those who master the craft. Custom pieces can fetch thousands, a testament to the enduring appeal of the human touch in a digital age. This shift from necessity to luxury mirrors a broader economic transformation, from subsistence to abundance, where the artisan's work is appreciated as art. Politically, your role was as much about allegiance as it was about iron. In 9th century Mercia, the blacksmith was a linchpin in the power dynamics, your allegiance influencing the strength of a local lord's arsenal. Today, while no one's expecting you to arm the local militia, your work still resonates with echoes of its historical significance. The knowledge passed down through generations shapes not just tools and weapons, but also the very fabric of societal evolution. So, as you stand at the edge of the forge, the day's heat dissipating into the cool night air, you're aware that your work is both mundane and monumental. Each clang of the hammer, each spark that flies, is a note in the symphony of history, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. You may not have worn a crown or wielded a scepter, but your hands have shaped the tools that built kingdoms and defended realms. Let's wrap this up with a look at the broader impact of your craft. In a world teetering on the edge of chaos, your work brought order, your tools built communities, and your weapons safeguarded them. The legacy of the Saxon blacksmith is less about the myths and more about the tangible impact on the world. You didn't just forge iron, you forged connections, communities, and futures. In the grand scheme of things, you might not have been a wizard, but in your own way, you were a magician of the everyday. The legacy you leave is not just in the artifacts of your labor, but in the enduring respect for craftsmanship, the timeless dance of fire and metal, and the quiet power of persistence in the face of adversity. So, when the day is done and the forge is silent, know that your work is never truly finished. It echoes through time, a testament to the enduring spirit of the blacksmith. In the bustling heart of 2nd century Alexandria, where the scent of spices mingled with the salty breeze of the Mediterranean, a man named Claudius Ptolemy was busy crafting the ancient world's equivalent of Google Maps. Picture him, though not too vividly, because we'll actually have no idea what he looked like, scribbling away in a library that was supposed to house every book ever written. Alexandria was the Silicon Valley of its day, but instead of coding apps, they were busy trying to decode the universe. And Ptolemy was right in the thick of it, making maps that would guide explorers. Well, not exactly where they intended to go, but that's a minor detail when you're inventing geography. Ptolemy was a bit like that friend who gives you directions based on landmarks that no longer exist. Turn left where the old tree used to be. He created a map that, while revolutionary, had some continents that could use a little repositioning. But hey, no one's perfect, right? His magnum opus, the Geographia, was essentially the ultimate roadmap of the ancient world, minus the pesky detail of scale and accuracy. Back then, the Earth was believed to be the center of the universe, and Ptolemy was convinced it was the map of maps, despite Europe being a tad too large and Africa not quite reaching the Indian Ocean. The thing is, Ptolemy didn't just make stuff up. He based his conclusions on the best available data. He was a mathematician, astronomer, and geographer rolled into one, which in itself is a bit like being a triple threat in ancient academia. He used the math available to him to try to plot the world, which was a bit like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and no picture on the box. His errors weren't because he was careless. It was because he was working with limited information. If he had a GPS, he might have done better. But alas, no satellites in antiquity. Now, you might wonder why people continued to use his maps for over 1,000 years, despite the glaring inaccuracies. Well, back in the day, if you wanted to chart a course across the seas, Ptolemy's work was the best you had. His Geographia was copied and recopied, spread across the known world, and became the geographical gospel simply because it was better than the alternative, which was no map at all. And let's face it, even a dodgy map is better than navigating by pure guesswork when you're trying to avoid sailing off the edge of the world. But let's take a step back to the man himself. Ptolemy lived in Alexandria, the intellectual mecca of its time, where scholars from around the world gathered to exchange ideas and, occasionally, swap a few exaggerated tales. If you were a smart cookie in the 2nd century, Alexandria was the place to be. The great library of Alexandria was a treasure trove of knowledge, with scrolls galore, though sadly it wasn't fireproof, as history would later reveal. Ptolemy, in such an environment, had access to a plethora of texts and the chance to discuss his theories with other great minds. His Geographia wasn't just about maps. It was an ambitious attempt to compile all geographical knowledge of the Roman Empire and beyond. He even included instructions on how to make maps yourself, like an ancient DIY guide for budding cartographers. And let's not forget his other contributions. Ptolemy was also a big deal in astronomy. His Almagest was the go-to manual for understanding the cosmos, with a geocentric model that placed Earth firmly at the center. Sure, it was later proven wrong, but it's the thought that counts, right? Ptolemy's work was a product of its time, an era where the world was still an uncharted mystery, and every new map was an attempt to make sense of it. His geographical errors were less about incompetence and more about the limitations of ancient science. His longitude measurements, for instance, were off because he didn't have the luxury of accurate clocks, which wouldn't come along until the 18th century. And while his maps might have sent sailors a bit off course, they were still valuable tools for understanding the world as it was known. So, Ptolemy, with his misplaced continents and all, was a man ahead of his time. His maps, though flawed, were a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. They served as a foundation for future explorers, even if those explorers had to do a bit of recalibrating along the way. His work reminds us that progress often comes with a few missteps, and sometimes a wrong turn or two can lead to unexpected discoveries. And speaking of unexpected discoveries, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how Ptolemy stitched his map together like an ancient quilt of geographical guesswork. The man was a true pioneer in the use of longitude and latitude, which, at the time, was as groundbreaking as inventing the wheel. Ptolemy's grid system was the Google Earth of its day, minus the satellite imagery, of course. He proposed dividing the Earth into a spherical coordinate system, which sounds fancy, but really, it was like trying to map out a pizza by using olives and pepperoni as markers. Latitude lines were based on the length of daylight, which, in the absence of a reliable clock, was a bit like guessing the time based on the shadow of your neighbor's sundial. Longitude, though, was where things got sticky. Without modern chronometers, figuring out your position east or west was akin to solving a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Ptolemy didn't have atomic clocks beeping away in his toga pocket. He had to rely on the stars making educated guesses that were, shall we say, prone to a bit of drift. His prime meridian ran through the Fortunate Isles, aka the Canary Islands, which he might have chosen because they sounded, well, fortunate. But using these methods, he managed to create a grid that gave explorers a rough idea of where they were headed, emphasis on rough. Now, let's debunk some of that overblown accuracy. Ptolemy's maps were about as precise as a game of broken telephone played by toddlers. While his latitude lines were commendably consistent, his longitude skewed like a carnival mirror reflection. Misplaced continents and distorted distances were par for the course. For example, he thought the Indian Ocean was landlocked, a minor detail that would have had Vasco da Gama spinning in his grave. And yet, these maps were the gold standard for centuries, copied and recopied like an ancient meme that just wouldn't die. The allure of Ptolemy's maps lay not in their accuracy, but in their audacity. They were a testament to human imagination, a grand tapestry of what the world might be if you squinted a little. And speaking of squinting, let's not forget about the mythical islands sprinkled like fairy dust across his maps. The Isles of the Blessed, for instance, were said to be a paradise where heroes went after death, a sort of ancient Club Med. These islands were the fake news of the day, stories spun from sailors' tales and wishful thinking. They were less about geography and more about the human need for wonder and mystery. Let's pivot to Ptolemy's geocentric model of the universe, a concept that was less about scientific discovery and more about keeping things politically and philosophically tidy. In the grand cosmic seating plan, Earth sat smugly at the center, with planets and stars doing a celestial waltz around it. This wasn't just a scientific stance, it was a world view that placed humanity at the heart of creation, which was pretty good for morale. After all, if you're going to navigate a world full of mythical islands and miscalculated continents, it helps to feel like the universe itself revolves around you. Ptolemy's universe, with its crystalline spheres and epicycles, was as elaborate as a Byzantine mosaic, a work of art that held sway for over a millennium. Sure, it was later debunked by Copernicus, who had the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the Earth wasn't the center of all things. But for Ptolemy, the geocentric model was a political statement as much as a scientific one. It fit neatly with the prevailing religious and philosophical doctrines which endorsed a universe ordered by divine power with humanity at its core. In a way, It was comforting, like believing your hometown is the center of the world. But let's not gloss over the economic and social realities that shaped Ptolemy's work. In his time, map-making wasn't just an academic pursuit, it was a tool of empire. The Roman Empire, with its insatiable appetite for expansion, needed maps to plan conquests, trade routes, and tax collection. Ptolemy's maps, despite their flaws, were invaluable for these purposes. They were the ancient equivalent of GPS for Roman administrators, allowing them to envision and manage the sprawling territories under their control. And while they might not have been accurate, they were authoritative, which, in the world of politics, often counts for more. And so, Ptolemy's maps, with their mythical islands and skewed continents, served as a canvas for the imagination. A world not as it was, but as it might be. They were both a product of their time and a catalyst for future exploration. As we continue our journey through the history of cartography, remember that every map is a story, a snapshot of human understanding at a particular moment in time. Ptolemy's work reminds us that knowledge is ever evolving, and sometimes the most inaccurate maps can lead to the most incredible journeys. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the world of ancient geography, where fact and fantasy often walked hand in hand. And speaking of the blend of myth and reality, let's dive headfirst into the economic and political waters that Ptolemy was navigating, because, believe me, these were as murky as the Nile in flood season. Picture the Roman Empire at its zenith. It's not just a sprawling mass of land and people, it's a colossal machine of politics and trade humming with the relentless drive of expansion. And at the heart of this beast, maps weren't just tools for wandering sailors, they were strategic blueprints for imperial ambition. Now, for Ptolemy, crafting a map was akin to playing a high-stakes game of strategy, where each line drawn could mean riches or ruin. The Roman Empire stretched from the windswept moors of Britannia to the parched sands of Egypt, and every inch of it needed overseeing. Trade routes crisscrossed like a spider's web, each strand vital to Rome's economic lifeblood. Spices from the east, grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania. These were the currencies that fed the empire's insatiable appetite for wealth and power. Ptolemy's maps, with their ambitious scope, became indispensable for plotting these routes, even if their accuracy was on par with a weather forecast from a fortune-teller. But let's talk costs, because map-making in antiquity wasn't just a matter of ink and parchment. It was an investment, often a costly one, in both material and manpower. Papyrus wasn't picked off trees like apples. It was cultivated, processed, and assembled, a painstaking process that could drain the coffers faster than a Roman senator at a banquet. And then there were the scribes, mathematicians, and scholars who toiled away, their eyes straining in the flickering candlelight, turning raw data into the semblance of a map. Ptolemy's work wasn't just a solo endeavor, it was a collaborative effort, a testament to the intellectual ecosystem of Alexandria. The literal cost of these maps was mirrored by a figurative one. With every map Ptolemy produced, he was treading a fine line between innovation and imperial expectation. In an empire that thrived on conquest, maps were more than geographic guides. They were manifestos of power. A map that showed a new land wasn't just an academic curiosity, it was a potential target. Ptolemy's maps, however distorted, hinted at the possibilities of expansion, feeding the insatiable Roman hunger for new territories to tax and exploit. Yet in showing the world as they imagined it, his maps also reflected the empire's blind spots, its ignorance of realities beyond its borders and the cultures it would never fully understand or appreciate. In this swirling mix of commerce and conquest, Ptolemy's maps were both groundbreaking and trapped by their time. They represented a world striving for order in the face of chaos, a civilization trying to pin down the shifting sands of knowledge. Each map was a snapshot of Roman hubris, a declaration that the world was theirs to map, even if they hadn't the faintest clue what lay beyond the next horizon. It's a bit like claiming ownership of a cat that's clearly not interested in being tamed. Ptolemy, like many of his contemporaries, was caught in the intellectual tug-of-war between the known and the unknown. The Roman Empire, with its sprawling territories and diverse peoples, was a jigsaw puzzle with pieces scattered across continents. Ptolemy's maps were an attempt to fit those pieces together, even if some had to be forced into place with a hammer. His work was less about what was and more about what could be, a vision of the world seen through the lens of Roman ambition. Now, let's bust a few myths while we're at it. The Roman Empire wasn't the indomitable force of nature it's often made out to be. Yes, it was powerful, but it was also riddled with internal strife, corruption, and the constant threat of rebellion. Ptolemy's maps were as much about maintaining control over these restless territories as they were about exploration. In a world where the line between civilization and chaos was as thin as a Roman senator's toga, maps were a way of asserting dominance, a declaration that Rome had the world in its grasp, even if reality was considerably more slippery. The allure of Ptolemy's maps lay in their promise of order and understanding in a world that was anything but. They were a reflection of the Roman psyche, a civilization that saw itself as the center of the universe, destined to bring enlightenment to the barbarian fringes. It's a romantic notion, but also one that glosses over the harsh realities of conquest and colonization. For every new territory mapped, there were cultures displaced, resources exploited, and histories overwritten. Yet, despite these uncomfortable truths, Ptolemy's maps endured, a testament to the human desire to chart the world and, by extension, our place in it. They were both a product of their time and a catalyst for the future, inspiring explorers and dreamers alike to venture into the unknown. And as we continue to unravel the threads of Ptolemy's world, we're reminded that maps, like history itself, are a blend of myth and reality, a story waiting to be told. So, as we chart our course through the annals of history, remember that every map is a journey, a glimpse into the minds of those who dared to look beyond the horizon. Ptolemy's work, with all its flaws and brilliance, remains a beacon of human curiosity and ambition, a reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries are not about where we are, but where we might go next. Stay tuned, because the story of ancient geography is far from over, and there are still plenty of twists and turns to explore. As we sail into the medieval period, it's time to see how Ptolemy's maps found a second life, much like that song from the 80s that inexplicably becomes a hit every few decades. Picture this. It's the Middle Ages, and scholarly monks are the rock stars of their day, holed up in monasteries, copying texts by candlelight. But instead of head-banging to metal, they're poring over manuscripts like Ptolemy's Geographia, because apparently medieval Europe had a thing for retro. Now, these maps were the cartographic equivalent of a vinyl record, charmingly outdated but with a cult following. They provided a framework that medieval mapmakers couldn't resist, even if they had to squint a bit to make the pieces fit. Ptolemy's legacy was like the medieval version of a viral TikTok trend, spreading through the scholarly circles of Byzantium and the Islamic world before making its grand comeback in Renaissance Europe. His maps weren't just copied, they were revered, like relics of a bygone era that hinted at a world full of potential. Enter Christopher Columbus, a man with a dream as big as his miscalculations. Columbus, inspired by Ptolemy's maps, set sail in 1492, convinced he could reach Asia by heading west. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Now, if Columbus had bothered to cross-check Ptolemy's estimates, he might have packed a few extra sandwiches for the journey. Ptolemy suggested that Asia was just a hop, skip and a jump across the Atlantic off by a continent or two, but who's counting? Columbus wasn't navigating by Ptolemy's maps alone. He was also armed with a mix of medieval charts and a hefty dose of optimism. His voyage was less about precise navigation and more about gutsy exploration. In Columbus's defense, he wasn't entirely to blame for the oversight. The medieval understanding of geography was a patchwork quilt, stitched together from classical texts, travelers' tales, and a dash of fantasy. It was an era when mythical creatures were as likely to appear on maps as actual coastlines. Ptolemy's influence was a bit like Google Maps during a service outage, still useful, but not entirely reliable. Speaking of unreliable, let's talk about the practical realities of using Ptolemy's maps. Medieval sailors didn't have the luxury of a soothing GPS voice guiding them through uncharted waters. Instead, they had maps that were more pirate treasure maps than turn left at the next coral reef. Ptolemy's maps were a starting point, but they required a lot of interpretive dance to be of any practical use. Picture a captain squinting at a scroll, trying to decipher whether that smudge was an island or just a coffee stain. The allure of Ptolemy's work lay in its promise of a world connected by a web of trade routes and exotic locales, even if the reality was a bit more tangled. His maps hinted at the riches of the Orient, the spices of India, and the silk of China, enticing explorers to brave the unknown. They were maps that spoke to the imagination, not just the intellect, a siren's call to adventurers seeking fame and fortune. But while Ptolemy's maps were the stuff of legend, the reality of medieval navigation was a far cry from the romanticized vision we might have. Ships were at the mercy of the elements, and sailors relied on rudimentary tools like the astrolabe and compass, innovations in their own right, but hardly foolproof. Navigation was as much about luck as skill, and even the most seasoned mariners could find themselves hopelessly adrift. It was a world where a storm could send you off course for weeks, or where a misjudged wind could mean the difference between discovering a new world or becoming a footnote in someone else's epic saga. Despite these challenges, Ptolemy's maps endured, partly because they offered a tantalizing glimpse into what lay beyond the horizon. They were a bridge between the known and the unknown, a testament to humanity's insatiable curiosity and the drive to explore. Even as they warped reality, they laid the groundwork for a new era of discovery, not because they were accurate, but because they dared to imagine. As we unravel the threads of Ptolemy's enduring influence, it's clear that his maps were not just geographical tools, but cultural artifacts. They represented an era when the world was still a mystery, when every voyage was a leap of faith into the great unknown. And while they didn't always lead explorers to their intended destinations, they did something equally important. They inspired them to set sail in the first place. In the grand scheme of things, that might just be the most significant map any cartographer could hope to create. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of history, let's not forget that Ptolemy's maps, with all their quirks and errors, were instrumental in shaping the world as we know it. They were as much about storytelling as they were about science, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a dream and a map that's slightly off course. Stay tuned, because there's still more ground to cover in the epic tale of ancient geography, where myths and reality collide in the most unexpected ways. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of history, let's not forget that Ptolemy's maps, with all their quirks and errors, were instrumental in shaping the world as we know it. They were as much about storytelling as they were about science, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a dream and a map that's slightly off course. Stay tuned, because there's still more ground to cover in the epic tale of ancient geography, where myths and reality collide in the most unexpected ways. Now, let's bring this ancient saga to a close, but not before we marvel at how Ptolemy managed to leave a legacy that still makes waves today. You see, Ptolemy's maps were like the mixtapes of the ancient world, passed around, remixed, and cherished long after they were first composed. So why did these flawed artifacts endure through the ages? Simple. They tickled the human fancy for exploration and the grandiose idea that we could fold the earth into our understanding. Ptolemy's work was a leap forward, but not without a few stumbles. His maps were a bit like early internet memes. Everyone shared them, but not everyone understood them. Sure, he got some fundamentals wrong, like making Europe a little too comfortable on the scale, but let's give credit where credit is due. He was working without Google Earth or even a decent compass. His system of latitude and longitude was revolutionary, and, believe it or not, it stuck around. Even today, those coordinates are the backbone of every GPS app, guiding modern explorers through the urban jungles of New York or the actual jungles of the Amazon. Fast forward to the Age of Discovery, and Ptolemy's influence was still going strong. His Geographia resurfaced like a pop song from the 80s that inexplicably becomes a hit every few decades. During the Renaissance, when the world was dusting off its old books and dreaming of distant lands, Ptolemy's maps were like a siren call to explorers with an itch to scratch. Columbus, for instance, might have packed a few extra snacks if he'd known that Ptolemy had slightly underestimated the size of the Atlantic. But these maps gave shape to the unknown, and in a time when the world seemed vast and mysterious, that was enough to get ships sailing and dreams soaring. The real kicker here is that Ptolemy's maps were as much a leap sideways as they were forward. They preserved the notion of a world ordered by human design, Earth at the center, everything else revolving around it. This geocentric view was comfy, like an old armchair that fit the universe snugly into human-centric philosophies and religious beliefs. Even as Copernicus and Galileo later shattered this cozy universe with heliocentric models, Ptolemy's vision had a good run, comforting generations with the idea that humanity was at the heart of it all. And let's talk about the myth and romance that wrapped around Ptolemy's legacy like a cozy toga. His maps were sprinkled with mythical lands and fabulous tales, places like Atlantis, which inspired explorers and writers alike. They were less about pinpoint accuracy and more about the allure of what could be. This blend of fact and fiction made Ptolemy's maps not just tools of navigation, but canvases for the imagination. They were the original choose-your-own-adventure books, where each journey promised new wonders and, if you were lucky, a bit of treasure. But let's pivot back to reality for a moment. Ptolemy's maps were also a reflection of the political and economic forces of their time. The Roman Empire needed maps to control its vast territories, and Ptolemy's work was a vital component in that imperial toolkit. His maps helped chart trade routes that connected the empire and facilitated the movement of goods and taxes across continents. It was a world where the economy was as much about who controlled the trade winds as who controlled the land. Yet, despite the historical weight they carried, Ptolemy's maps were also a testament to human fallibility. They remind us that even the most brilliant minds can be hobbled by the limitations of their era. Without the technology to measure longitude accurately or the knowledge of continents yet to be discovered, Ptolemy did the best with what he had. His errors were the missteps of a trailblazer, not a blunderer. And in the grand scheme of things, they served as a springboard for future generations who would correct the course he set. In the end, Ptolemy's legacy is a paradox. His maps were simultaneously groundbreaking and flawed, a testament to both the power and limits of human knowledge. They were a blend of myth and reality, mapping a world that was imagined as much as it was known, and while they didn't always lead to the intended destination, they inspired countless explorers to set sail, proving that sometimes the journey is just as important as the destination. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through Ptolemy's cartographic contributions, let's remember that history is a tapestry woven from threads of truth and tales, fact and fantasy. Ptolemy's maps, like that old mixtape, are a reminder of our enduring curiosity and the drive to chart the unknown. They are a legacy of imagination and a testament to the enduring power of maps, not just as guides to the physical world, but as mirrors reflecting our hopes, dreams, and missteps along the way. And as we look to the future, let's keep in mind that every map, no matter how flawed, is a story waiting to be told. A story that continues to unfold with each new discovery and every new horizon. The sun's just easing over the horizon, bathing the sandy streets of Timbuktu in a warm golden hue. You're standing in a city that's a literal crossroads of civilization, where the vast Sahara meets the mighty Niger River. It's a place that's been whispered about in far-off lands, often as a shimmering mirage of wealth and learning. But today, you're about to see the nuts and bolts of what makes this city tick. And spoiler alert, it's not just piles of gold. As you wander through the early morning market, the air is a cocktail of exotic aromas, spices, leather, and the earthy scent of the morning dew lifting from the ground. Merchants are setting up their stalls, haggling over the positioning of their goods because location, even in the 15th century, is everything. Here, in the heart of Mali, the currency isn't just gold or salt, it's also geography. Timbuktu's strategic position on the trans-Saharan trade routes made it the medieval version of prime real estate. Gold, of course, is part of the legend. Indeed, Mali was one of the world's leading gold producers at the time, and its wealth was no fairy tale. By some accounts, the region produced about 2/3 of the world's gold in the 14th and 15th centuries. But the real story isn't just the glitter, it's the grit, how far goods travelled to get here, and how the city became a melting pot of ideas and cultures. The most prized commodity, often more valuable than gold itself, is salt. Yes, salt. This isn't your everyday table shaker stuff. This is life-preserving, trade-empowering salt, cut in slabs from the distant Tagaza mines located some 500 miles north. Imagine the logistics, caravans of camels trudging through the Sahara for weeks, each carrying 200-pound slabs of salt. It's like the medieval version of an Amazon Prime delivery, except with a lot more sand and a lot less convenience. These caravans didn't just bring salt. They brought stories, knowledge, and most importantly, connections. Goods from the Mediterranean and beyond were swapped here. Textiles, grain, horses, and even books. Timbuktu was a hub not just of commerce but of culture. And it was all orchestrated by a network of traders who could teach today's CEOs a thing or two about globalization. Let's address the myth of Timbuktu as some golden utopia, shall we? It's true that the city had its share of opulence. Mansa Musa, the 14th century ruler of the Mali Empire, famously distributed so much gold during his pilgrimage to Mecca that it reportedly crashed economies. But the daily grind in Timbuktu wasn't all about rolling in riches. Most people were involved in agriculture, animal husbandry, or the trade networks. The wealth of the city trickled down through these trades, but it wasn't an endless fountain for everyone. In the market, you can see the economic engine of Timbuktu in full swing. Traders from across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe crowd the narrow alleys, their conversations a symphony of languages: Arabic, Songhai, Tuareg, and more. It's a place where the world is both vast and intimate, where the distance from Cairo or Marrakesh is measured not just in miles, about 2,400 and 1,600 respectively, but in the exchange of ideas and goods that shrink those distances. As you navigate the bustling stalls, you might bump into a scholar or two. Timbuktu wasn't just a marketplace for goods. Oh no, it was a marketplace for ideas. The city boasted 3 famed universities and countless madrasas, making it a beacon of learning. Scholars from all over came to study here, and the exchange of knowledge was as vital to Timbuktu's allure as any pile of riches. Lest we romanticize the past too much, let's talk about the harsh realities. Life in a desert city wasn't exactly cushy. Water was precious, disease a constant threat, and political stability was as fickle as the desert winds. The city changed hands numerous times. Whether it was the Tuareg, the Mali Empire, or later the Songhai Empire, each ruler left their mark, often in blood and gold. Yet the myth of Timbuktu persists, a testament to its allure and its role in the imagination of explorers and historians alike. Today, as you stand in the marketplace, you're not just a bystander watching a city at work. You're part of a living, breathing tapestry, a place where stories are woven as intricately as the finest fabrics being traded around you. So, as the sun climbs higher and the city hums with life, remember that every grain of salt, every nugget of gold, every ancient manuscript tells a piece of the story. Timbuktu may have been a city of legends, but it was built on the backs of traders, scholars, and ordinary people who dared to dream in the harshest of landscapes. And speaking of stories, let's wander away from the bustling market and dive into what really made Timbuktu glow brighter than any sand-strewn mirage, its intellectual scene. As the morning sun casts long shadows, you find yourself drifting towards Sankore University. This isn't your average ivy-covered institution. Think more adobe architecture and camel parking. Founded around the early 14th century, Sankore was not just a university, it was the intellectual heart of a city that thrived on ideas as much as trade. Now, don't expect to see any toga-clad scholars or stacks of leather-bound books like you're in some Renaissance fair. Instead, picture rows of students sitting cross-legged in the dusty courtyards, each with a wooden board and stylus, copying down the day's lesson like human Xerox machines. You see, manuscripts were the currency of knowledge here, and copying them was both an art and a necessity. One could argue these students were the original content creators, minus the digital followers, of course. Sankore, along with its sister institutions, Jingwa Rebbe and Sidi Yahya, wasn't just about memorizing facts. The curriculum was as diverse as it was rigorous. From Islamic law to astronomy, from mathematics to medicine, if it was worth knowing, it was taught here. And this was no intellectual mirage. At its peak, Timbuktu housed over 25,000 students, a number that would make any modern university green with envy. But don't get too lost in the romance of ancient academia. This was a time when knowledge was as much a commodity as salt or gold. Manuscripts were precious, often worth more than their weight in gold, and collecting them was a symbol of prestige and power. Think of it as the medieval version of owning a first edition Harry Potter, but infinitely more valuable and without any wizardry. The scholars of Timbuktu were no mere bookworms. These were intellectual heavyweights like Ahmed Baba, a prolific writer who churned out over 40 works in his lifetime. He was once so renowned that when the Moroccan invaders came knocking in 1591, they carted him off to Marrakesh to boost their own academic cred. Talk about being headhunted. And let's not forget the students, the unsung heroes who painstakingly copied texts by hand, ensuring that knowledge flowed like the Niger River. These scribes were the backbone of Timbuktu's intellectual trade, turning out copies that would find their way to Cairo, Fez, and beyond. It's a reminder that while technology changes, the human thirst for knowledge remains a constant. But before you get swept away by the allure of ancient scholarship, remember this: education in Timbuktu was not free. Like a modern college tuition, it came with a price tag. Wealthier families could afford to send their sons to study under the great scholars, but for many, the cost was prohibitive. Scholarships were few and far between, and financial aid wasn't exactly a thing in the 15th century. So, as you stand in the courtyard of Sankore, surrounded by the echoes of centuries-old debates and the scratch of styluses on boards, you start to see the bigger picture. Timbuktu wasn't just a city of gold and salt. It was a city of ideas, a place where knowledge was power, and the written word was as precious as any metal. And let's be real, the idea of a thriving intellectual hub in the middle of the desert might sound like a fairy tale. But that's the beauty of Timbuktu. It was a place where the improbable became possible, where the harsh realities of desert life met the limitless potential of human curiosity. So here you are, in the heart of Mali, in a city that defied the odds and became a beacon of learning. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting its golden glow over the sandy streets, remember that Timbuktu was never just a mirage. It was a testament to the enduring power of ideas, a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, brilliance can flourish. With that thought in mind, let's prepare to explore how this intellectual engine was fueled, and how the interplay of trade, politics, and culture made Timbuktu the legend it is today. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's bask in the glow of a city that dared to dream, and in doing so, shaped the course of history. So, as the sun climbs higher, painting the adobe walls with its relentless light, let's take a break from the bustling courtyards and step into the heart of Timbuktu's social and political scene, over a meal no less. Because, let's face it, nothing fuels a good historical chat like a little sustenance. You've wandered into a courtyard shaded by date palms, where a feast is about to be laid out. Picture it: bowls of couscous, richly spiced stews, and a generous sprinkling of North African flair. It's a communal affair, everyone from merchants to scholars to farmers sharing the same meal. This is where social circles overlap, and the hierarchy of Timbuktu begins to reveal itself, one dish at a time. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of who's who in this medieval melting pot, let's dispel a common myth. Timbuktu wasn't some egalitarian paradise where everyone held hands and sang kumbaya. Oh no, the social structure was as layered as a well-baked mou fouille. At the top of the pile sat the nobility, mostly descendants of the ruling Kita dynasty, who claimed lineage from none other than the legendary Sundiata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire. Talk about having a pedigree that's pure gold, literally and figuratively. But power wasn't just about who your great-great-grandfather was. Real influence came from wealth. Unsurprising, given that Timbuktu was a hub of trade. Enter the merchant class. These folks were the real movers and shakers, controlling the flow of gold, salt, and books like medieval stockbrokers. They were the ones who could make or break alliances with a single trade deal. And let's not forget the scholars and clerics, wielding the pen like a sword, often advising the rulers and swaying decisions with their well-chosen words. Their influence was more subtle, but just as potent. Down the social ladder, you'd find the artisans and craftsmen, essential cogs in the machine of daily life. They were the ones creating the goods that made the market hum. And finally, there were the labourers and farmers, the backbone of the city, working the land and the herds under the unforgiving sun. Their lives weren't gilded with gold or knowledge, but they kept Timbuktu's heart beating. Now let's not gloss over the less savoury aspects of this society. Slavery was very much a part of life in Timbuktu, as it was in much of the world at the time. Slaves were used for everything from household chores to hard labour, their lives dictated by the whims of their masters. It's a stark reminder that this golden age had its fair share of tarnish. As you sample the local fare, let's talk politics. Timbuktu was a city of many rulers, each leaving their mark like a series of ambitious landlords. The city was part of the Mali Empire, but later the Songhai Empire took the reins. Each empire brought its own style of governance. Under the Mali Empire, you'd have seen a more centralized form of rule, with officials appointed directly by the emperor. But the Songhai, they liked to delegate. They divided the empire into provinces, each governed by a local leader called a Kumina Fari. Think of it as a medieval franchise system, with each governor having a fair bit of autonomy so long as they paid their dues to the central power. And let's not forget the local Tuareg tribes. These desert nomads were like the original freelancers, sometimes allies, sometimes foes, always opportunistic. The Tuareg were known for their skill in navigating the Sahara, and they played a crucial role in the trans-Saharan trade. They could be hired to protect caravans or, in a twist of fate, raid them. Their influence was woven into the fabric of Timbuktu's politics, a reminder that power often came from the edge of a sword or a well-placed dagger. Now, while the top brass were busy managing affairs of state, the nitty-gritty of daily governance fell to the city's officials, like the Qadi, a judge who handled everything from property disputes to moral conduct. The Qadi was a man of the law, respected and often feared. His word was final, and his decisions would echo through the narrow streets of the city. As the meal winds down and the shadows grow longer, you can't help but reflect on the complexity of this society. It's a far cry from the simplistic tales of a harmonious golden city. Timbuktu was a place of contrasts, where wealth and poverty, power and subjugation, knowledge and ignorance existed side by side. It was a city driven by ambition, a place where the dreams of many were realized, but not without their share of nightmares. And so, as you sip on a cup of sweet mint tea, the conversation turns to the ordinary folks of Timbuktu, the market vendors, the farmers, the slaves, all playing their part in the grand tapestry of this legendary city. Their stories are often overshadowed by tales of empires and kings, but they are the ones who truly shaped daily life. Their resilience and tenacity are what kept the city thriving, even when the sands of time threatened to bury it. So here's to the unsung heroes of Timbuktu, the everyday people who lived and loved under the burning sun. It's their stories that remind us that history is not just about the great and the powerful, but about the countless lives that form the foundation of any society. As the day cools into evening, remember that what we've explored is just the beginning. This city of legend still has more tales to tell, more layers to uncover, and more myths to debunk. But for now, let's savor the taste of history, knowing that the story of Timbuktu is far from over. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows over the sandy streets, you find yourself wandering deeper into the heart of Timbuktu. The afternoon light catches the adobe buildings, turning them into warm golden monoliths, each with its own story to tell. And let me tell you, these aren't just any buildings, they're the architectural love children of a dozen different cultures. Forget the notion of a uniform, cookie-cutter city. Timbuktu is the definition of a cultural mosaic, where every stone and beam whispers tales of influence and exchange. Let's start with the architecture, a perfect emblem of this cultural mashup. The Jingweriba Mosque, for instance, isn't just a religious site, it's an architectural statement. Built in 1327, under the patronage of Mansa Musa, yes, the same guy who made it rain gold, its design is a beautiful blend of West African and Islamic influences. Think, mud brick construction with a certain je ne sais quoi, a fusion of local Sudano-Sahelian style and the Islamic aesthetics brought by North African architects. It's like Timbuktu's version of a cultural smoothie, with every ingredient adding its own unique flavor. And speaking of flavors, let's talk about the music. Because what's a city without a soundtrack? The air is alive with the sound of the kora, the ngoni, and the balafon, traditional instruments that are as much a part of Timbuktu as the sand itself. But here's the kicker. The music you'd hear isn't just local. It's a dynamic mix of influences, a symphony of the diverse peoples that have passed through these streets. Imagine Tuareg rhythms blending with Mande melodies and Arabic scales. It's a jam session of epic proportions, where musicians are like the DJs of their time remixing sounds into something wholly unique. Now, let's shatter the myth of Timbuktu as some isolated, monolithic culture. This city was more like the medieval version of a global village, long before anyone thought to coin that term. Picture traders from the Middle East in heated negotiations with Berber merchants, while a Songhai scholar discusses astronomy with a visiting Egyptian. It's a melting pot, and it's messy, vibrant, and oh so human. Forget the idea of a singular Timbuktu identity. This place is as complex as a soap opera plot, with twists and turns that would keep even the most seasoned historian on their toes. Take the manuscripts, for instance. They weren't just dusty old books, they were the original Wikipedia pages, minus the editing wars. Written in Arabic, Songhai, and various other languages, they covered everything from theology to science. And they weren't penned by some ivory tower academics with nothing better to do. These were practical texts used to solve real-world problems, like how to navigate the Sahara or manage a bustling trade hub. It's a reminder that knowledge in Timbuktu wasn't just theoretical, it was a tool for survival. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The reality of cultural exchange wasn't always kumbaya and hand-holding. There were tensions, rivalries, and yes, a fair share of conflicts. Different groups had different agendas, and sometimes those agendas clashed like cymbals in a marching band. The Tuareg, for instance, were known for their fierce independence and weren't always thrilled about foreign influences encroaching on their turf. And then there were the political power plays, with rulers jockeying for position like contestants on a medieval reality show. It's a testament to human nature that even in a city built on exchange, self-interest often reigns supreme. Speaking of self-interest, let's talk trade. The economic lifeblood of Timbuktu was its position as a crossroads, where goods flowed like the currents of the Niger River. But it wasn't just about trading stuff, it was about trading ideas. And in a place like this, ideas were as valuable as gold. The exchange was a two-way street, with Timbuktu influencing the world and vice versa. Remember the Moroccans who invaded in 1591? They weren't just after gold. They wanted to tap into the intellectual riches of the city. It's like a hostile corporate takeover, but with more camels and fewer spreadsheets. Now, let's wrap our heads around the real allure of Timbuktu. It wasn't just its wealth or its strategic location. It was the city's ability to adapt, to evolve, and to absorb influences from far and wide. It was a place where the improbable became possible, where cultures collided and created something entirely new. And that, my friend, is the true magic of Timbuktu. Not some fairy tale utopia, but a living, breathing testament to the power of human connection. As you continue your stroll through the sun-dappled streets, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of this city. It's a place where the past and present mingle, where every corner holds a story waiting to be told. And while we've only scratched the surface today, there's still so much more to uncover. So keep your eyes open, your ears tuned to the music of the city, and your mind ready for the next chapter in this incredible tale. Because Timbuktu, with all its contradictions and complexities, is far from done telling its story. As you stroll through the sun-dappled streets of Timbuktu, a city that's been the subject of tall tales and whispered legends, the day slips into evening. The last rays of sunlight paint the adobe walls with a warm, golden glow, a fitting backdrop for a city that's shrouded in as much myth as it is history. Let's take this moment to reflect on the legacy of Timbuktu and how its story has been shaped, twisted, and sometimes downright contorted over the centuries. Now, here's where things get interesting. While we often talk about Timbuktu in terms of its own achievements, its role as a trade hub and intellectual powerhouse. The narrative that many of us know today was largely crafted by outsiders. Enter the European explorers of the 19th century, those intrepid adventurers with a knack for storytelling and a penchant for the dramatic. For them, Timbuktu was the stuff of legends, a city of unimaginable wealth and exotic allure. They spun tales of golden cities and scholarly wonders, and while they weren't entirely wrong, they certainly stretched the truth like a piece of medieval taffy. Take René Carlier, for instance, the first European to reach Timbuktu and live to tell the tale. In 1828, after an arduous journey through the Sahara, Carlier arrived in Timbuktu only to find a city that was far more humble than the legends suggested. Yet his accounts didn't stop the myth-making machine. Instead, they fueled it, as European audiences were hungry for stories of distant lands and exotic peoples. The allure of the unknown was irresistible, and the real Timbuktu became a backdrop for fantastical narratives that bore only a passing resemblance to reality. But let's not throw too much shade on these explorers. They were products of their time, and their tales, however embellished, served as a bridge between worlds. They brought Timbuktu into the global conversation, albeit through a lens of romanticism and, let's be honest, a fair bit of cultural bias. Their stories transformed Timbuktu into a symbol, a distant, almost mythical place that represented the ultimate in adventure and discovery. Fast forward to today, and Timbuktu still occupies that mythical space in our collective imagination. It's become shorthand for the ends of the earth, a place as remote as it is mysterious. But here's the kicker. While the myths are captivating, the reality of Timbuktu is equally compelling, if not more so. The city's legacy isn't just about gold-laden caravans or ancient manuscripts. It's about resilience, adaptation, and the enduring power of human connection. So why does understanding the real Timbuktu matter? Because it offers us invaluable lessons for our own globalized world. Timbuktu thrived because it was a crossroads, a place where cultures, ideas, and goods flowed freely. It was a testament to the power of exchange, proving that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a catalyst for innovation and growth. In an age where borders are more porous than ever, Timbuktu's story reminds us that the blending of cultures can create something profoundly beautiful and deeply meaningful. Moreover, Timbuktu teaches us about the importance of preserving knowledge. The manuscripts that once filled its libraries were more than just dusty old tomes. They were repositories of wisdom, containing everything from medical treatises to philosophical discourses. In a world where information is at our fingertips, it's easy to forget the value of preserving our shared human heritage. Timbuktu's commitment to knowledge reminds us that learning is a treasure, one that should be protected and cherished. But let's not romanticize too much. Timbuktu also shows us the darker side of human nature. It was a city built on trade, and with that came exploitation, inequality, and yes, the grim reality of slavery. These are not just footnotes in Timbuktu's story. They are integral chapters that remind us of the complexities of human history. Acknowledging these truths is essential if we are to learn from the past and strive for a more equitable future. As the sun finally dips below the horizon, casting the city in a twilight glow, you realize that Timbuktu is not just a place, it's a symbol of human ingenuity and folly, of dreams realized and shattered. Its story is a tapestry woven with threads of myth and reality, each as vital as the other. And as you stand in the heart of this legendary city, you understand that Timbuktu's greatest legacy is not its wealth or its knowledge, but its enduring ability to capture our imagination. So here's to Timbuktu, a city that defies easy categorization, a place where the sands of time have buried secrets and unearthed truths. Its story continues to unfold, a reminder that history is never static, but a living, breathing narrative that invites us to explore, question, and learn. And as we carry the lessons of Timbuktu into our own lives, let's remember that the real magic lies not in the myths we create, but in the realities we embrace.